card for a parking problem.
And 4 in your 23.
Yes, that's 4, I'll get a 28 from truck when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Line truck, white Lincoln X-ray 985, should come back up ahead.
So you had 2000. Patrick Spalding.
10-4, if you can just put a little note in something like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on a vehicle if I can remove it.
Fine. Fine. Rockingham 505. 505 intercepting Dillison case for Athens. Explain it. Soon to be X. Slash her tires and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return.
Yeah, forgive this at 32.
10-4. You're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Did you copy the 505?
Yeah, 4.
21.
No, 3 in Depot Street. Truck boy entry 5.
That was 435.
10-4.
10-4.
Can you go 43 again?
143.
You go with that 43 you had, I didn't hear any, but I just looks like we do.
10-4. I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabana Circle or to the subject's address.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that town property case, and I'll be 76 to the Williams Road address to see if I can find the owner.
10-4. 449 1120.
Now 449 1121, thank you.
10-4.
Code 4. 4.
Alright, we have 535.
You have a great college.
535.
You and me, you got no for a woman who fucked into a house. I'll slide up that way.
Caller is now been able to close the front door. He's now pounding on the door, trying to get in still. He's now 5 foot, long dark hair, got tie-dye shirt on, and number 21 is on.
We have separation. Excuse me. Hey guys, good to see everybody. Check my sound, make sure we sound good. Beauty, I do not have the details on the poop story. I can try to find out more for you. It's been a while since I've been told about it. So this involves Sean and sending out somebody on a mission to try to gather the poop of Brian Albert. I don't know. This is just kind of the crazy stuff that has gone on and has continued to go on in this case. And frankly, to watch the degeneration of the man that Sean McDonough seemed to be last year into what he now is disturbing. I don't really, I'm not going to go into it. You can't even play the clips that he's saying out of fear of unnecessarily embarrassing someone else, but also of embarrassing him. The stuff that is going on is, I don't know what's going on. The stuff that he's putting out there is strange and a little bit disturbing and a little bit sad, and makes you wonder. I don't know. Is it, you don't want to throw this stuff around because I know in social media, but is it legitimately time for a mental wellness check? There's something going on. It's not, it's, what he's doing is bizarre. And I can't imagine that somebody was behaving like that in law enforcement for 28 years. And I don't think he was. And, as far as I know, his career was more or less unblemished, except an incident near the end. But I don't know. It's bizarre. All right. So let's move on from that. So tonight we're not going to do a real long show tonight. I want to get to watching the NFL game. I know Tom does too. And who knows what else is going on, but it's a beautiful night outside. And I have the Discord open, so I will check for questions there. Anybody here on the Discord, like Jen, put the questions under tonight's show. And I will periodically check there. And I do have it open. All right. We are going to go over Turtle Boy's interview shortly of the second juror. I think it's very, very informative, actually. And funny thing is and we're going to go over some of the reaction by the Turtle people, or the Free Can Read people on Twitter talking about it. And they're in shock about what the jury was deliberating and how they were thinking about the case. They're utterly stunned. But here's the thing. Had you been watching this channel for the last year, there'd be no need to be stunned, because all the issues that the jurors focused on are all the same things that I've been saying to focus on for the last year. No, I'm not just patting myself on the back. I'm saying for the people that have been here with us that long, they know, yes, these are the things that I have emphasized, and they didn't. So if you wanted to be ahead of the game, stick right here with us at the cottage. All right. I wanted to talk for a moment before I get to that about a couple of things. I'm going to try to talk about it carefully. We all know that bias is a part of human nature. We all have bias in areas, especially that we have strong feelings. It impacts how we see everything. This is something that's true of every single one of us. And the only way to really reduce its impact is to be aware of it and to make an effort, make a regular effort to say, I'm a human being and I have bias and I need to work on it. All the time, you have to be vigilant against it. Sometimes it might help to imagine things if you were on the other side or in someone else's shoes. So a little more than a year ago, let's say 13, 14 months ago, I leaned a little bit more towards the conspiracy, although I was always on the fence and asking questions. But based on, at the time, I was challenging the prosecution's case quite a bit. And so that made me popular with what we now know as the pink crowd. Back then, they hadn't adopted that color yet. But so they were pretty happy with me back then. But then I kept asking harder and harder questions. And some of the information that was trickling out from the prosecution tended to satisfy some of this and debunk some of the conspiracy theory. So it was a long road to get there, because the prosecution's job is not to try it in the media, whereas the defense is going to do that. And they certainly were in this case doing that. But as I started asking harder and harder questions, Otherwise, I didn't change anything about myself. I didn't change my general style, or nothing about my background changed. But all of a sudden, those same people that had liked me and supported me in the hundreds now were not only against me. I understand that, because I no longer was supporting what they believed, but now they were willing to believe all kinds of crazy things about me, that I was faking cancer, that I'm trying to run fundraisers to make money off cancer, which I do not. Eh, Um, and even worse things that I can't even repeat, but you knew they were going to be said. And I knew this as I was making this turn, because you could sense what kind of mob this was, this turtle crowd. And you can just say, as a guy, you can say, what are the worst things that you can call another man? And you know what they are. And that's what they did. And you knew that they would, despite the fact that there's no truth to it and there's no evidence. Even taking an example of a bar that was in Worcester that was years before I owned my own place and that I had no connection to. And try to, people like the Pitbull, Jan Altman, and other people trying to say that Jason Haley, whatever its name is, trying to connect me to that as though it's a fact, when I had no connection at all to the place. But this is how they do it. And that's fine. We all know that on, let's call it this side, because most of the people on my following my channel now will call it this side because they believe that Karen is guilty. But I'm not on a side in the sense that I'm not from Canton. I don't really know any of these people. I've met Chris and talked to Chris. I like Chris. Other than that, I don't think I've met anybody connected to the case or talked to anybody connected to the case, not directly. And so I'm not taking a side. I just care about the truth. That's it. That's all I've ever been trying to pursue. But on this side, you do have to also be careful. Now, it doesn't happen on this side like it does on the other side, but there's a tendency when any two groups become polarized to start seeing everything in black and white and to start demonizing people on the other side, thinking the worst of everybody on the other side. Now we do this as kids when you're in the 6th grade. And maybe my experience is a little different living in a city, but you're living in a city and the next block over are different kids, the next street over, and they're not part of your gang. And I don't mean gang in the sense of like street gangs. I mean more like little rascals, that kind of stuff, but they're from a different, they are, you've seen them in school, you've seen them at Little League, they're in a different gang. And you assume, and as kids, you're talking about it, the worst. They are the worst. They do this and they do that. And then later on in high school, it's all forgotten. You realize they were normal and you're friends with them, or you're dating their sister or whatever. I mean, it's crazy, right? But we do this as adults too, sadly. And we obviously do it in politics, where people demonize everybody on the other side. And you're quick to believe anything that's out there in social media that says something bad about someone that you disagree with. And it's just something you want to have to be on guard against. Because sometimes once you meet somebody, you may realize, even though you disagree with this person, and even though this person may have done some things that you don't agree with, they're not a bad human being. They're certainly not all bad. And it's just, I think it's important, and I don't want to, you may say, oh, Kevin, you're not strong enough to criticize these people. But I think if you've watched this channel long enough, you understand. Has there anybody been more critical of people like Sean or Turtle than me on terms of on the air? I don't think so. But I've also been critical of Little Jelly for different reasons, cowardly behavior, and also of channels like The Glare and LTL, Empty Calories. But it sounds like these are personal attacks. They're not. I have nothing against these people personally. It may seem like that, but it really isn't. It's the behavior that I have a problem with. Because the common thread here is that there's no interest in the truth. Or in some cases, these people are recklessly spreading things that they know are not true, especially Sean nowadays. But, Turtle too. Turtle doesn't spread everything. He's not out like Sean trying to recklessly spread everything he says is untrue, because he knows in the long run that will hurt him journalistically, but he doesn't actually care about the truth. So, but I think it's important for us to remember that we don't want to demonize everybody just because they're on the other side. Criticize what they, and sometimes when possible, criticize what they do and not who they are. If you can, look, just try to catch those things in yourself. All of us. I'm not preaching to you. I'm preaching to myself too. We all have to do this because we've all made this mistake. Now, I want to, before I get to the interview of the juror, I want to give a taste, and maybe this will be a good thing or a bad thing, but these are some of the things, the insights that I've had over the last couple of years from studying true crime, not just the Karen Read case, but other cases. And I've kind of boiled them down to general rules I'm including these in the book that I'm writing on Karen Read. And I think some of them are kind of interesting, but I'm going to put them out there for the purposes of feedback. So you guys can message me and you think maybe you disagree with these rules, or maybe you think there's a better way to put them, or maybe think of your own rule, your own insights that you might have. So some of these come from insights that I've had from other cases that I apply now to Karen Read. So let's start with what I call rule number 7. And this was the longest one. You try to get things down to a succinct half a sentence if you can. So this one was rule number 7. Oh, let me just see. I got an email. Okay. Don't just ask when you're looking at these cases. So this is when you're looking at these cases. This is something I recommend. Don't just ask why someone did something. Ask why they didn't do something. And this is not just suspects. This is anybody whose action is relevant to what's going on in the case. It could be the suspect. It could be the victim. But I think it's easier for us to say, why did the chicken cross the road, than it is to say, why didn't the chicken cross the road? But sometimes it can bear fruit by asking those questions. So, for example, in the Lizzie Borden case, when I was studying that, so either Lizzie did it or some intruder came in from the outside and did it. Now, Abby was killed at 9:30 on the second floor. Andrew was killed on the first floor at 11 o'clock. So there's an hour and a half difference. And in that time, the two people that were in the house were the Irish maid, Bridget, and Lizzie Borden. So either one of them did it or the intruder was in the house and somehow was undetected by those two women. So the question that people have asked, not just me, but other people have asked, is if there was an intruder in the house, why didn't he kill Lizzie and Bridget? Why would he just stay in hiding? So that's just an example. You know, there are questions that come up, and there are things that come up in the Karen Read case too. You might say, why didn't the troopers take a picture of the taillight? And I think that's kind of an obvious question. I think the answer to that is that they don't take pictures. That's what the crime scene services does when they come in. All right. So it's very kind of division of labor, and everybody does what they're trained to do. So I think that's the obvious answer for it. But there's just a lot of little things like that where you can look into this case. Why didn't the troopers, when they left the McCabe house, go and confiscate the vehicle? And that's something we're digging into and we're going to address in the book. But those, I think people sometimes skip over those questions, but they can bear a lot of fruit. Some of these things that are rules might seem a little obvious, so I apologize. We're working on it, all right? So rule number 6, odd things can add up to unreasonable doubt. Because we all know that odd things can add up to reasonable doubt, right? So if there are odd things in a case that remain unexplained, then that could possibly indicate reasonable doubt that maybe the investigation, there's a hole in the investigation. And a serious enough hole in any investigation would mean reasonable doubt about the state's theory. However, what I'm saying is that sometimes odd things can add up to unreasonable doubt. So if you have, and I've gone over this before on the channel, as you guys have heard, but if you have really solid evidence, if the prosecution has really solid evidence about what happened, there is still going to be odd things, because there are odd things in every case. And so I asked this recently. I did an interview with M. William Phelps, who's studied hundreds of crimes and murder cases, or over decades. He has over 40 true crime books published. And I asked him that question, and he said, yeah, there's odd things in every case, because it's human nature. There are things that remain unexplained for reasons that have nothing to do with anything, but they can still look odd. That's just, so what you have to do is distinguish between odd things that are meaningful and odd things that aren't. And at the end of the day, that is mostly determined by, and you try to find explanations for those odd things. In fact, that's almost a rule. I'm thinking of making that a rule number 4. Things that at first seem odd often aren't odd, but it's so obvious that I feel like it's almost an insult to the reader to call that a rule. But it is true, right? There's a lot of things that seemed odd in the Karen Read case that have all been explained by now. I guess maybe the bigger question on that would be, since there's so many odd things that have been explained, things that really fired people up before, why doesn't that make people more cautious about maybe standing back a little bit and waiting for the explanation? All right, so enough on odd things. 2 more rules that I have here for you today. One is something that you guys have heard me say many times before. There are no geniuses. And it's important, because what I'm saying is that there are no geniuses on the cops or on the robbers, on the good guys or on the bad guys. There's no geniuses in the defendants, in the suspects, in the witnesses, or in the investigators. Yes, there are geniuses in life, but they're rare. And they tend to be working for NASA or for the Hubble Space Telescope, or the Super Collider in CERN in Europe, or things like that. There are geniuses, obviously. But the reason I say there's no geniuses is this. If you are coming up with a theory about what happened in a case, and that theory requires the presence of a genius, I would stand back and question that a lot more closely, because geniuses are rare. And I really, honestly, I can't think of any example in a true crime case where an actual genius has showed up. And that includes the people that are investigating the bad guys. They're very flawed human beings. They're human beings. They're not going to do these kind of things you might see in a Columbo mystery hour. They're just going through the routine of solving the case step by step based on their training. You're not going to have too many geniuses coming up with great insights. And same thing with the bad guys. Even in some of these cases we're looking at, where a doctor who's a very intelligent person has killed his wife. But when you look at their actions and the mistakes that they make trying to cover it up, no, they're not geniuses either. Not when it comes to criminals, not when it comes to crime. So if your theory requires a genius, think again. And to the extent that it requires a genius. So when you start breaking down, I did a video on this in May of 2023. Because as I was looking into this, I was like, this requires, when you keep asking questions, the whole conspiracy theory really required at least one genius, one evil genius, to make it make any kind of sense. And what are the chances that there's an evil genius that just happens to be lurking around at an after-hours party in Canton after they've been drinking all night? I think the odds are pretty much against that genius showing up. So then you start looking at all the other questions about what it would take for this to work in a way that would cover up all the evidence. Or even just looking at the explanations that Turtle Boy put out about this case back in the first few weeks, where, for instance, Jen McCabe at 5:30 5 o'clock takes the call from Karen and then goes out searching for John with Karen and Kerry Roberts. And in the Turtle Boy view of things, it's all because she's managing the crime scene and she's planting the idea within Karen, who must be very malleable according to this theory, that she did it. Because they had to explain why she was saying at the scene, I hit him. But in reality, doesn't it seem more normal that if Jen McCabe was at that house and John went in and got beat up and she knew he was going to die, that she would never take that call? That she would never get in that car? Isn't that just 999 times out of 1,000 what someone would do? So if you're requiring her to be that kind of a genius, I haven't met Jen, but maybe she is. But isn't it more likely that she just didn't do that? And again, I'm not saying that these people aren't intelligent people. I'm not a genius either. So we're all just regular people, and some people with a little bit more intelligence than others. And then there's plenty of intelligent people that are on the good guys or on the bad guys, but there are no geniuses. The last thing I want to give is something I've talked about it many times over the last year, and I'm just going to boil it up. But because I've done that, I'm going to keep it really simple. But improbabilities multiply. So if you have an action that is fairly unlikely, and then you have another action that is also fairly unlikely, and both of these actions have to be true in order for an event to occur, those improbabilities assigned to each one of those things multiply. So if this is just obviously hypothetical, but let's say there's a 1 in 100 chance that let's say there's a 1 in 100 chance that Jen McCabe would take that call and go out with Karen. And then there's also a 1 in 100 chance that Michael Proctor and Yuri Buchanan actually went to the crime scene that day and either lied about it and were never caught, nobody saw them, or managed to get all the other people there, the 7 troopers on the CERT team and Lieutenant Tully and whoever else was there to lie about it, and to get the DA to lie about it in his press conference last September. So let's say both of those things you think are not impossible, but they're improbable. So let's say you assign them a probability of 1 in 100. But if you need both of those things to be true in order for this conspiracy to happen, then it becomes 100 times 100, which is what, 10,000? So now it becomes 1 in 10,000. And if my math is wrong, I told you I'm no genius. All right, so that was the last thing I had on that. So let's get to the interview. And it was a good interview. It's interesting to hear how juries think. And all right, let's see if we get this up here. Try to get this so you can see it a little bit. Now, I went on this. Now, Turtle Boy has changed his statement. Sometime in the last couple hours, he had an opening statement, and I didn't copy it down, but it was something to the effect that Karen Reed, it's unfair to Karen Reed that her fate is in the hands of 12 jurors based on this conversation with this juror. So again, Turtle Boy was shocked by what he's hearing from this juror, what mattered and what didn't matter, not only to this juror who was a not guilty vote, but also to the other 12 jurors. Now has since changed that and taken that down. But you'll see as we'll go to the comments, everybody in Turtle Land is quite upset about what this non-guilty vote was saying. But this is also another indication that this is not fiction by Turtle Boy, I believe. Now, I don't know why other than the fact that these 2 jurors are not guilty votes, but I don't understand why they would reach out to someone like Turtle Boy. I mean, if you have even a little bit of an idea about, it's not just his coverage of this case, but the constant deliberate attempt to demonize and insult the victim's family. I'm not going to go over it, but you ought to be aware of it. If there's any jurors watching this right now, you need to be aware of this stuff. You need to be aware about what this guy is. All right. The intentional effort over the last year to intimidate jurors. Now, his real purpose was not intimidation. I don't think he thought he was going to change their testimony. His real purpose was entertainment for his own channel. But he has no conscience. He doesn't mind trying to smear innocent people. No conscience. I mean, he smeared Tara Kerrigan. I forget, Tara Kerrigan Hayes. I forget. But she did a great job on the 2020 interview. John's ex-girlfriend. Very classy woman. Very sincere. Didn't attack anybody on the other side. But he had to attack her and saying she's just someone that's coming out looking for attention. They attack everybody that disagrees with them. So if you're a juror out there, you want to interview this guy. This is what you're locking in with. You're not just locking in this idea that Turtle Boy is just a little bit controversial and rough, but he's going after the truth. No, he doesn't care about the truth. He cares about his own channel, his own reputation, and that's it. He never cared about the truth. That's the difference. If I found out tonight after the show, some information came to me that was convincing that showed that John went inside the house and was killed inside the house, I'd be on the air tomorrow morning reporting it to you. There's no way that Turtle Boy would do that in his situation. He gets information that shows that Karen is guilty. Does anybody out there, even his biggest fans, really think that he would share that with you at this point? He would not. He's not committed to the truth. He's committed to himself. And maybe soon to be committed. But that's a joke. Sorry. All right. So let's get to the actual. But anyways, Turtle Boy was very unhappy with what he learned from this interview. This is all right. Who was the most convincing witness for the defense? This looks changed. I don't know. Do I have the right interview? Oh, this, you know what? I think this is the wrong interview. I apologize. So maybe he hasn't changed it. So I apologize to Turtle Boy if that's the case. I don't know if he's taken the article down. This is one from 6 days ago. So trying to reboot this. You know how that website can be. Yeah, it's not rebooting. It's not reloading. Oh boy. I don't know if he's pulled it down or because earlier I went up and it was the article from last night. I don't know. All right. Got the website open. Let's see. All right. Okay, I got it here. It's episode 399. Let me bring it up for you. All right, so I take it back. He has not changed. I was in the wrong article. So, but this is published in the last 24 hours. He says, on Friday, I interviewed a juror on the Karen Read case who wavered between guilty and not guilty. So this was a juror that wavered on the manslaughter charge, but who confirmed that the jury was unanimous on the other two charges. However, the interview left me with even more questions. This is an EMT. He's a guy, and he agreed to do a couple interviews with Turtle. So his answers give us a lot of insight into what these 12 people were discussing as the world waited on a verdict. It was an eye-opening interview that showed me and many others the dangers of Karen Read putting her fate in the hands of 12 strangers. The guilty voters completely disregarded testimony that the general public thought was critical and instead almost exclusively focused on three things. All right, we're going to see this. So what we're going to see is, I think actually speaks well of the jury process. That these jurors, including this one, and even the other one that was a non-guilty one that talked to Turtle, I think took their job seriously and weighed evidence very logically. Let me just have a quick drink, cup of coffee. Drink of coffee. Tom doesn't like it when I drink on the air, but sometimes I don't know another way to do it without hiding it. All right. One of the things that I'm seeing here, I think, that goes on in the jury process is that jurors become more logical than they normally are. So if you're a 9 on the logic scale, you become a 10. If you're only a 4, you become a 6, maybe even a 7. And there's a reason why. When you have 12 people discussing something, and so let's just say 2 of us were discuss this case and discuss it as though we were weighing Karen's actual innocence or guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We might each have 6 or 7 things that's important to us to discuss, right? But if you have 12 of us in a room, now you're going to have dozens of things, and that's not an efficient way to get things done. So I think what happens in a juror room, in the jury room, is that jurors, it really is a boiled down process where only the most important things become considered, and everything else kind of has to be tuned out. Otherwise, you just would never be able to, it'd be really hard to have 12 people have a discussion on something, on anything, right? So, all right. So let's get to the questions. Was there pressure put on the 3 not guilty jurors to change their votes to guilty? So according to what we're hearing, it was tied 6-6 on manslaughter, and then 3 people switched to guilty on manslaughter, so then it became 9-3 in favor of manslaughter, and that seems to have been possibly the final output. So he's saying, were those 3 guilties that switched, was there pressure on them? Was it tense? What were their stated reasons for refusing to change their vote? Oh, I'm sorry. I take it back. He's talking about the 3 that didn't switch. So what was their pressure on the 3 people that were not guilty all along and refused to switch? And he says it was very tense, more so for the side of not guilty. They didn't want to change because they felt there was reasonable doubt. There were some individuals who were very set from the beginning and wouldn't waver no matter what evidence was presented. We don't know who he's talking about here. Is the juror talking about people? This juror was on the fence, so maybe he's talking about people that were firmly in the guilty side. But when he's saying there were some individuals that were very set from the beginning, I don't know. It could be talking about not guilty too, and which is fine, except the worry is that people came into this because we already know that the juror that was dismissed near the end absolutely came in, was an avowed turtle rider and should not have been on the jury. And so we know at least one almost got through, and that person was never going to deliberate honestly. They never intended to. They hid from the court that they had already made up their mind before the trial. Did jurors discuss how the defense only called 6 witnesses? And did jurors think this made her look guilty? And that's a good question. And the prosecution had asked for almost everybody, the jurors said. So there was no real need for the defense. So that's a reasonable answer. So they didn't hold it against the defense because they understood that the prosecution called up all the witnesses. And so the defense got to cross-examine them. So there were 2 people on the defense list who were bit by Chloe. There was 1 person who was on the other end of Michael Proctor's text messages who they didn't call. Look, what Turtle Boy doesn't understand is just because Karen leaks him a bunch of stuff, that she's trying to get him to the truth. If the defense didn't call someone to the stand, logically, wouldn't you have to say there's a reason? That there was some problem with their testimony? Just because the defense puts a name on a list doesn't mean that was going to actually help the defense team. Some of that's there even just to throw off the prosecution, make them waste time researching what that witness might have. But it's hard to believe. So Turtle actually thinks that there were some key witnesses that the defense chose not to call. What? Because they were lazy? I don't really get it. They thought they'd used up enough of the jurors' time? No. So I don't know about 2 people that were bit by Chloe. I know of the 1. And the 1 was Chloe escaped from the door. And dogs go crazy, and ours do too, when you see a dog walking across the street, being walked by a person. And if they manage to get out the door, they're going to attack. And that's what Chloe did. And when two dogs get in a fight, you might have the most peaceful, loving dog in the world, and it might be your dog. You put your hand in the way, it's going to get bit. The dog doesn't know what it's biting or what it's doing in the middle of a fight like that. So the person that got bit by Chloe was, as far as we know from the testimony, was just somebody that the owner of that dog that was being walked and had got in the middle of it. That's it. There's no other evidence that I've seen. So Turtle might have something that somebody on social media sent him, but if there was some verified instance of that, the defense would have used it. Same thing with person on the other end of the text messages. Is that his sister, I guess, or one of his high school friends? I mean, but we got the messages. So I don't know what you would need to call those people onto the stand for. And there are rules about who can be called to the stand too in terms of relevancy. So some of that stuff might apply in some of the witnesses that they're looking at. But I do know that one of the witnesses they had on their list, I'm not going to mention her name, but we looked into her pretty deeply. And when you saw the name on the list, we were wondering, wow, what does she have? Could she have something that could be explosive? Could she have been inside the Sally Port or near the Sally Port? But she wasn't called. And we had found out beforehand that she was meeting pretty regularly with Prosecutor Lally. Now, I don't know what her story was, but I'm going to guess that her story was not going to help the defense, so they would have called her. So there you have it. That's just logic, isn't it? All right. So there were two people on the defense list. So she said the juror said we weren't privy to who else could have been called. So of course they weren't. So I don't know why Turtle would ask that. So we didn't think it was absolutely necessary. There were certain experts that could have benefited the defense. For example, Lexus and the triggering of an event where there may be a data recorder showing when there was excessive acceleration or some sort of movement that was very specific, therefore causing the car to track the date and time. Now, this is a little bit not worded very well, but I don't know how this interview was done, whether Turtle did his thing where he usually illegally records somebody and then makes a transcript later. I don't know if that happened here or he was just scribbling out notes. So it may not be in the exact words of the juror. We don't know. Well, we'll get to, so obviously the things that they were most interested in was the fact that the vehicle went backwards. But I don't know why the juror mentions therefore causing the car to track the date and time. So the tech screen data, that is the key evidence, but it does not have date and time on it. What we do know the date and time of these events. We know the time to the second, or very close to the second, but only because it correlates with the data on John's phone. And that's not something the jury was effectively presented, because it was Trooper Paul that presented the vehicle data, and it was Trooper Garino that presented the phone data. And they seem to believe, or Lally seems to believe, that you could not have given Trooper Paul that phone data. And I don't know if this is true. The lawyers that I've talked to said, no, that's not the case. And it doesn't make sense to me either. Trooper Paul would not have been qualified to do an extraction on that data. So on John's phone. However, just like Trooper Paul didn't collect the pieces of taillight glasses, that's crime scene services that collected those, but documented exactly where they were. And then Trooper Paul uses that report to come up with his own conclusions on the accident reconstruction. I see no reason why he could not have used a report compiled by Trooper Garino. And that's what they had. So that report would tell us what time Karen turned onto, what time she missed the turn onto Fairview, and then she did the 3-point turn, and then what time she made the turn onto Fairview. And then the GPS also showing exactly where his phone went, how they went to the edge of the driveway, and very briefly, seconds, and then she drove up to the end of the edge of the property. And that's where John's phone, that's the last GPS coordinate of John's phone was around 12:25, and it was more or less where it was found. although it did move slightly at 12:32 and 16 seconds, according to the health app. That's movement, though. That's measuring movement. That's not the same as a change in GPS position. So to me, that information would be extremely useful to Trooper Paul, and he could coordinate that with the evidence that so he'd be able to establish what time Karen made the 3-point turn that triggered the event, and then the time that is on the vehicle data is the exact distance in seconds between the first event when she did the 3-point turn on Cedar Crest and the second event when she went backwards at 25 miles an hour. That was those two events were 8 minutes and 4 seconds apart. So we know, say, plus or minus 5 to 10 seconds that she made the 3-point turn at about 12:24 exactly. Could have been a little bit before or a little bit after. And so starting at that time, 8 minutes and 4 seconds would put the second event when she goes backwards 62 feet for 25 miles an hour. That would put that at 12:32. A little bit, probably a few seconds after that. And John's phone moved for the last time at 12:32 and 16 seconds. So I can't see any reason why they couldn't give Trooper Paul that key information. So he says that would have been beneficial for an expert from that group, meaning TechScream, such as the manufacturer themselves, so they could talk about the data that was being recorded. They said at one point that there were 23 events on the data recorder for Karen's car, and one of those was the excessive speed backing up and then the sudden jerking movement or a change of an angle as a direct result of the strike of the smaller object, John. That was told to us by Trooper Paul, and we wanted someone who was more experienced and had more experience or more knowledge of physics and engineering. That would have been beneficial for the defense, knowing full well the Commonwealth didn't have that witness. So the Commonwealth didn't have that good witness, but the defense didn't bring up any witness on that. So what this juror is saying is the defense would benefit by getting someone to do that. But I also think that the Commonwealth would benefit by getting an expert from TechStream, Toyota TechStream, to come in and talk about it, because there are lingering questions. Why did the 3 trips on which so normally you would think a trip would be one on a key cycle, there'd be one trip. So you get in your car and you go to the supermarket, you come home. That's one trip, and it'd be one key cycle from when you start the car and when you stop the car. But we've realized it's probably a lot more complicated in these modern vehicles. And so we think that what happened was Karen left the key fob in the car for those last couple of trips. So because we know for a fact that Trooper Paul told us that the trip from the waterfall to Fairview and then back to Meadows, and it also, in addition, the trip to go looking for John and then go to the McCabe house and then come home, and then finally the trip to Dighton. Those three trips were all on one key cycle. And now he matched it up by the mileage. But he never explained to us why there are 3 trips on one key cycle. And it doesn't seem like maybe he knows. I don't know. But some of that has to fall at the feet of Lally. That should have been developed beforehand. How does Lally go into a trial not knowing the answer to that? I find that stunning. I'm not trying to beat up on Lally. He had an enormous burden to shoulder here. But just looking at the big picture, the prosecution is putting someone on the stand, charging them with second-degree murder. And if that person is convicted, they're going to jail for maybe 15, 20 years, which is a good chunk of the rest of her life, especially given that she has health problems. And another man is dead, John O'Keefe. So given the gravity of that, the state couldn't find out what the answer was to that. It's stunning. It really is stunning. I mean, it's just, I don't want to call it incompetent at this point, but it's a serious lacking, and it's not the only lacking that came up. So Turtle Boy says, so you guys were not convinced by Trooper Paul. And the juror said a lot of us were not convinced by him. He didn't give us any equations. He didn't seem like he could answer many questions about physics. And I think that's an area where it came down to more the issue was of articulation. Um, it's not easy to get up and talk like that. It's like you just even take it to me. And I'm certainly no Alan Jackson, right? I'm not that articulate. But I've gotten a lot better over the last year since I've been doing these live shows. So you learn from doing. It's a different thing. I can definitely say the first time I did a live and you sit there looking at a camera and knowing that hundreds of people are listening to you, it's different. It's not like talking on the phone to someone. It really is different. So I recommend you try it to get to a sense of what it feels like, especially if you're by yourself, because you don't have someone to kind of to lean on, and you've not. It's if you're with someone that's asking you questions and you can just kind of answer questions and they'll pick up the ball if they see you drop it a little bit. It's a little different now. That's not exactly the same as what Trooper Paul went through, but I don't think Trooper Paul has had a lot of experience doing that kind of thing. So having to explain it in front of a global audience, that's what he was. He knew that, right? This trial was super high profile. And with little practice to have to go up there and articulate that well, that was very difficult. But I do think it's also fair. There were areas that he needed to study up and know more about coming into that trial. We just have to be fair about it. Turtle says, well, he was the primary witness for the Commonwealth to prove John was hit by Karen's car. If he didn't come across well to the jury, then how could anyone vote to convict her? What was their argument? And the juror replied, the individuals who believed in not guilty felt we couldn't correlate John. So the individuals who believed in not guilty felt we couldn't correlate John's injuries to the injuries of the motor vehicle strike. It wasn't clear, based on what we saw, that the vehicle strike caused death. The injuries he sustained and the injuries to the vehicles were not consistent with a pedestrian strike. So he didn't quite answer the question. But this is where I said, this is what I said a year ago should be the focus. Now, those of you that have been here for a year with me know. And when I was able to get one question out to the investigators without compromising anything, that was my question. Does the state have an accident reconstruction that they're comfortable with? That's it. Nothing's ever been leaked to me from the prosecution. But that's it. That's all I wanted to know. And the answer was yes. But I've said all along, it's a mistake to focus on Karen's statements at the scene. And we're going to find more of that. I've been harping this on and on for a year, constantly, both privately and on the show. So is Turtle's next question. So this conversation must have occurred where not guilty voters like you said that the injuries were not consistent with a motor vehicle collision. And then the guilty ones must have said, yes, they are. So what was their argument for that? The jurors said they were basing it on data. The data was showing that based on the data that the vehicle backed up and changed direction, and that there were some injuries on John O'Keefe, and then he died. Based on that data, they didn't even consider this other scenario where he went inside the house. It seemed like Karen backed up at a high rate of speed. The only other thing we could think of was it snowy and icy? Could the vehicle be stuck on something, gun it, and maybe it interpreted that as a very high revolutions per minute? And this to me meant there could be reasonable doubt. All right. I asked those same questions back when we first heard this data. I think it came out in September of last year. And so could you have tires spinning on ice or spinning in the snow? There really doesn't seem to have been any ice or much snow there at that time. And I have never seen any actual official explanation that or reasonably an explanation from an expert that might demonstrate that was possible. But I did ask the same question. So could the speed be off? Could the distance be off? And the distance was calculated. The distance, the vehicle data doesn't show how far the car traveled. That has to be calculated by the wheel rotations. So that's how they were able to do it. But I also think that, and I'm not sure about this, I believe something like those sensors are really there for safety. And I would bet that, and you have automatic anti-locking brakes and things like that. I would bet there's a sensor that could tell if wheels are spinning, like stuck. because that would apply to the traction that was implied. It's all done by algorithm now. So don't know for sure on that, though. That's just a speculation. But it sounds like these jurors were very logical. And they said, all right, you got a bunch of noise about text messages and did someone go in the house and blah, 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 blah. And they tuned that out. And they said the bottom line is she went backwards 24 miles an hour around the time when this happened for 62 feet. You know, the defense tried to suggest at the trial, absurdly, and Turtle has said this, that Trooper Proctor is the one that backed it up in the Canton police garage. He backed it up 62 feet at 12 miles per hour. But that can't work, because had he done that, he wouldn't have known to back it up 8 minutes and 4 seconds after the 3-point turn. He wouldn't have known how to recreate that. That correlates perfectly with the Waze data on John's phone. Trooper Paul didn't even know that. So who made this correlation? Like, remember, YCT rule number 3, there are no geniuses. Now, I don't doubt that Trooper Proctor is a capable guy, but he's not a genius. None of these guys are geniuses. None of us are geniuses. So the idea that he knew that John's Waze showed that Karen did a 3-point turn on Cedar Crest, he would have to recreate all of that. He'd have to do the 3-point turn. And then he would have to know that John's phone last moved 8 minutes later. So he would have to do the 3-point turn, wait 8 minutes, and then back up in the parking lot at 24 miles per hour for 62 feet, and nobody notices it. Nobody says, what the hell is this trooper doing out in the parking lot? Nobody notices any of that. It's absurd. It's really an absurd theory. And this is, you know, you could even see this juror who voted not guilty, or seems to have been a back and forth vote, was weighing things logically. And if the state does a better job of presenting the evidence, this juror is going to flip too. They won't be on this. They won't be on the jury again. But someone like this would no longer be on the fence. So Turtle says, so you're saying that for the guilty voters, the Lexus text stream data was really solid evidence, and you believe that a good witness for the defense to counter that would have been some sort of Lexus expert that can explain what the data means, and if she really went 24 miles per hour in reverse. Correct, the juror said, and that's the other thing. How is it in the entire lifetime of the car she only had 23 triggering events? Can revving the engine cause a triggering event? So this tells us that what a triggering event was not very well explained, and a little bit of that falls on Trooper Paul, but a lot of it falls on Larry. I would say most of it falls on Larry, because these are concepts that Trooper Paul is used to working with, but they're not concepts that we in the public are. And so what Trooper Paul did make clear was that you need, so all right, so let's back up for a second. You have the sensors in your car that are getting this data input. So the brakes, the steering wheel, the wheel rotations, things like that. And then you have these components within the vehicle that are taking that data and trying to interpret what it means. Now, the main component, the one that's in every car, let's call it the black box. It's behind the steering wheel. Another word, EDR, and it creates a report. I think the report is called a CDR. But the black box only creates a report, or another word for that is triggers an event, when there's a collision. And it has to be a collision between two substantially sized objects to leave a record in the data. This is what Dr. Wolf for the defense said, one of the ARCA guys. He said a pedestrian collision would not typically have been picked up by the black box because the size differential is too much, I believe is the way he put it. So, however, you have another system in Lexus Toyota vehicles that's called text stream, and that's also analyzing that data. And the text stream is a little bit more, I don't know if sensitive is the word, but it's more likely to trigger an event or create a snapshot from aspects of that data than the black boxes. So, for example, when Karen did the 3-point turn on Cedar Crest, she didn't hit anything, but yet it triggered the creation of an event. An event is a snapshot where it's once the event begins, it records it takes data from 5 seconds before and 5 seconds after the event. Why did it do it there? Well, Trooper Paul explained that when she had the car in reverse as part of the 3-point turn, that she hit the accelerator over 30%. So the algorithm is obviously normally not going to create an event. It's not going to trigger an event for a normal 3-point turn, but it's looking for something that's a little bit unusual. And apparently it's the system is set, the algorithm is set to, if it senses, among other things, the vehicle going in reverse at more than 30% acceleration, it's going to trigger an event. It's going to consider that unusual. So that's why there's only 23 events on the lifetime of the vehicle. So it's a pretty new vehicle. It's owned for a couple of years, and they really do need to have someone from TechStream come in and explain what are the conditions in which events are triggered in that data by TechStream. So we should be able to see what those other events are, right, to give us a sense of it. How often does Karen do 3-point turns that trigger an event? Are there any other 3-point turns in there? Now, when she did that 3-point turn on Cedar Crest, she was probably arguing with John. She's drunk and she's angry. So she was probably not driving the way she normally drives. Next question was, can you please clarify what you meant when you said that one of the jurors spoke to a family member who had alerted them of my presence, meaning Aidan's, in the courtroom? That was something we discovered in the middle of the trial. One of the jurors said they recognized your face in the courtroom. And from there, other jurors talked about it and family members were telling them information. One of the jurors' family members said that you were pointing out that one of the jurors was wearing a bow tie. And that wasn't my family member. That wasn't my family members, but one of the other jurors' family members knew that. And during deliberations, we discussed it a little bit more. So this all goes back to, I don't know if her hands were tied by the SJC, but the judge really made a mistake in letting Turtle Boy, anybody like a Turtle Boy in the press in that trial, because it was obvious he was going to try to identify those jurors, and he did. He didn't hide it. He probably wanted to get kicked out again because he loves that attention. It was the greatest moment in his life was when the trial was held up for an hour and a half in order to debate whether he should be kicked out. He loved that. Most normal people would be embarrassed by that. He loved it. This is the guy. He doesn't do this for money. He does it for attention. And so he never should have been let in. So he's trying to out these jurors and identify them. He should not be let in the next one. There has to be some standard of deciding who is an actual person from the media and who is a blogger that's out there in social media being irresponsible. Next question was, you were told not to talk about it when you went home, but it sounds like this juror talked to a family member at home who was watching my show or reading my tweets. That seems to be a violation. The judge ordered us not to discuss the case. She knew, and we knew, it was everywhere. One of the things we were asked to do was not watch news coverage. I continued to work throughout the trial. So I don't know. He didn't really answer the question. Does that mean something that he's ducking the question here? Did he watch Turtle Boy's YouTube show? I don't know. Anytime you see somebody not answer a question, you have to be a little suspicious. But, I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt. He may be I don't know. He may be trying to answer for the person who did say. So I think it's a matter of, all right, there's not necessarily a violation here. So if a juror's family member watched Turtle Boy and Turtle Boy talked about that person wearing a bow tie, and that family member went up to his relative on the jury that wears the bow tie and says, hey, they already outed you, I don't think that qualifies as discussing the case. So I don't think that that was any kind of an ethical violation by the juror. And so I give these guys the benefit of the doubt that they were not watching coverage of the case. They sounded intelligent and like they were thoughtful in the way they approached the job. And I think that's how most jurors are. I know that's how I've been on 2 juries. That is definitely how jurors are. Did your coworkers know you were on the jury? Well, yeah, this guy's an EMT, so he said he was kept working, so he must have been working 3rd shift. You know, again, just think about the difficulty that serving on a jury like that for 9 weeks causes. You know, so he's on a jury all day being put to sleep. You know, some of it unavoidable, but some of it obviously some of the droning that was going on. But then he doesn't want to give up that pay because you only get paid $50 a day as a juror. So this guy may have family and things. He can't give up 2 months worth of pay. So he still goes to work and then he comes back in. But yeah, people at work are going to notice that there were times that he couldn't be around during and that he would walk out of the room every time the case was being discussed. He lives in Norfolk County. Yes, he actually recently moved to Middlesex, though. What were the top 3 reasons guilty voters insisted she was guilty? This is interesting. Alcohol consumption. They showed the number of drinks she purchased and her blood alcohol level. The tech stream data. And the fact that they were there at the same time. So that's pretty interesting. But like I said, I think jurors boiled it down to what's the most important. And so what they're saying is, yes, she was drunk. The vehicle data shows that she was backing up 25 miles an hour for 62 feet. And there's no question that they were there at the same time. Was there some other time within that period that she could have been backing up at 25 miles an hour? Seems unlikely, right? And then you look at the fact that's your starting point. And then you look at the fact that there's broken taillight and blah, blah, blah. Pieces at not only broken taillight, but pieces there. So he adds that, in my opinion, they didn't prove that she was drunk that night. She could have drank when she got home. They never tested her blood alcohol until the next day. So there is a chance that she went home and drank some. I know people I respect a lot that believe that. And I don't discount it. I've done a lot of work trying to see in my life as a bar owner and a bartender. I've had to take training on this a lot, how to figure out the expected blood alcohol level inside a male or a female of a certain weight. And so generally a guy that's about 200 pounds, say my size, is if he drinks 4 beers or 4 shots of alcohol, 80 proof alcohol, in an hour, he's going to be right at the legal limit, which is in Massachusetts is 0.08. Used to be 0.10, but now it's 0.08. And then he's going to work out in his blood maybe the equivalent of 1 drink per hour. So it dissipates slowly. So legally, you could probably get away with drinking 3 beers in your first hour and then limit yourself to 1 beer an hour after that, and you'd probably be okay. So I probably shouldn't tell people in Canton that. They're probably drinking a little harder right now. But when you look at her blood, so they have to estimate. And so in the trial, they estimated that based on what she tested that morning, that her blood alcohol was about 0.07 to 0.08. I'm sorry. Her blood alcohol was 0.07 to 0.08 still at the emergency room that morning. So she was still very close to the legal limit. And then they came up with an estimate for what it would have been at 12:30 at night. And I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was about 3 times the level. But if you actually calculate her weight, which I guess is probably like 100 pounds, drinking 9 drinks in that time period, it ends up coming pretty close to what her alcohol level was the next day. And it's also influenced by things like anxiety drugs. I don't know if Karen's on anything like that, but there was some indication from the fact that her parents were worried she was going to take pills. I don't know what those pills were, but if they were anti-anxiety pills, that could affect the test the next morning. But there's still a chance she went home and made a drink. Who knows? I mean, it really gets down to your particular habits as a drinker. Back when I was drinking a lot, I never drank at home, and I never went home after a long night of drinking and drank more, or even a short night of drinking. Drinking was not something I did at home. But you look at Brian Higgins testified that after a long night of drinking Jamesons and Gingers that night, he went home and had 2 more at home. So everybody's different. People that are regular drinkers, they have their own habits. So if Karen's in the habit of going home and making another drink before she goes to bed, and I don't know that she is or isn't, then she probably did have another drink. What would have happened that affected her? I mean, you don't know. If she knew that she had been in an accident, you would think she'd avoid drinking, but hard to say. And that's the bottom line, is it's hard to say with things like that. Turtle says, then what do you mean they were at the same time? And he says the mere fact that they placed him there at that time and everyone else in the household claims that they never saw him. So those pieces of information made the jurors believe they were guilty. So on the one hand, you have all the witnesses saying that they didn't see John, and every single one of them would have to be lying. And on the other hand, you have the fact that there's no question Karen was drunk and she was there, and the data shows her backing up at a high speed. Did jurors find it all suspicious that not one of the people who left the house reported seeing John's body on the front lawn? Matt McCabe said he saw the tracks in the snow, but missed John's body. So this was interesting. This is so many of these things that came up. It gets more interesting. So if I bored you so far, I'm sorry. I promise you the interview actually has a lot of interesting stuff still to come. One of the things we deliberated on, says the juror, was whether or not there was enough lighting in the area. There were no street lights in the area, so they did note that to illuminate it. Could it have been missed if you're not looking for a body and it started to snow? Some people weren't sure, but they were sure that she was intoxicated. And that there was text stream data showing 24 miles an hour. And that's how you weigh it. And this is, somebody was saying to me, commenting on the channel a lot, he has his own German Shepherd. And he says there's no way that with all that was going on the front of the lawn, that Chloe would not have been barking inside the house. That's your evidence that you're going to hang your hat on? This is what I don't understand. You're going to hang everything on something like that when you have more powerful evidence, such as the text stream data? I don't get it. I honestly don't get it, because you're going to weigh all these things on both sides, and you have this really solid stuff that you can weigh on one side. Why would you? Now, we have 2 dogs, and they're similar. They're not German Shepherds, but they're similar size. They're the same breed, each other. And one of them barks at a lot of things. The other one seldom barks. And what they bark at is very particular, though. So one of them is obsessed with mice in the backyard, anything rodent-like. The other one is obsessed with rabbits. The one that's obsessed with rabbits is much more likely to bark. So the other one will be on the couch watching people outside, driving by, whatever's going on, and not bark. If even delivery, if Amazon shows up and comes into the house, that dog will not bark. That will watch the person come right up to the house, just a few feet away from the window, and he'll just watch. He won't bark. But the other dog is more likely to bark, but is still particular when it barks. So if there's a delivery coming, that dog will bark. But if someone is walking along the street, and our yard is probably similar length from the window to the street as it is at the Alberts. And so that dog that does bark a lot won't bark at somebody walking on the street, or a bunch of people walking on the street, or kids driving bikes. Doesn't bark at all of that. Never at a car. Doesn't bark at vehicles if they pull over on the front of the street. Only if they pull into the driveway and to deliver something. However, if somebody's walking a dog, then that dog goes crazy. but the other things remains perfectly silent for. So we don't know what Chloe barks at. We don't know when Chloe's sleeping at night, does she just lie down and go to sleep? Or is she up in the window barking at things that might be going on outside? Also, dogs, like people get used to the noise in their neighborhood. So if you're on a street that has a fairly significant amount of traffic, the dogs get used to it. They had trains behind the house, so dogs get used to it. So it's we don't know what Chloe would bark at. So if I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with you you think it's more likely that a dog inside the house, a German Shepherd, would bark at what's going on outside. But you have to put that evidence in its proper place and say, all right, we just don't know. But in the meantime, there's a lot of other stuff we do know on the other side. And I think that's how evidence has to be weighed. And I think that's how it sounds like the jurors weighed evidence. I think if somebody had brought up that, this is a perfect example of why I think a jury becomes more logical. Someone was never going to bring up Chloe's barking or lack of barking on that jury. Even the people that believe that Karen was not guilty knew enough not to bring something like that up, because it's not important enough. If you're trying to focus on the most essential pieces of evidence, and that's not one of them. So if they wouldn't bring it up, then we should avoid it too as much as we can and focus on the more important things. All right, let's talk about them both being there at the same time. Heather Mason, Ryan Nagel, that Heather was Ryan's girlfriend at the time, Ryan and Ricky D'Antonio. These are the people in the pickup truck, testified that Karen was alone inside her car and that John wasn't outside the car or inside the car with her. So where do the guilty jurors think John was? So they did discuss that. But at the end of the day, the individuals who believe she was guilty remain guilty. So he didn't really explain it. To me, again, it's not really... So the only one that was really looking at John's vehicle as they drove by was Ryan. And we don't know what else. We don't know what kind of state he was mind he was in. It was late on a Saturday. We don't know if he was looking at his phone. The area is dark over there. All we know, we don't know we can't say that John wasn't there. We can just say that he didn't see him. It's a dark area, very dark area. There's no street light. And if you know, so the way light works, right? If you're driving by somebody's house at night and the light is on inside the house and someone's inside watching TV or whatever, you're going to see pretty good, even just at a glance as you're driving by inside that house. But you're not going to see what types of bushes are there. You're not going to see, you'd be hard pressed to see anything outside that window, outside that window. You might get a general idea, but that's it. So if John is just a dark object that is somewhere outside the vehicle or in the process of getting out of the vehicle or lying back, we just don't know. And again, so this is, it comes down to weighing things that you do have definitive answers for versus things like the fact that Ryan Nagel didn't see John, because he also didn't see John get out of Karen's car and go into the house. And it seems like he was more likely to see that if Karen's story is true, that when she arrived, she dropped John off at the foot of the driveway, she said, and watched him walk up to the house. At that time, Julie Nagel was coming out. And as we also saw from Ryan Nagel's testimony, he was diligent about what he's a good brother. He was watching his sister come out. And then when she went back into the house, he watched her walk back into the house to get safely inside. So he would have been watching for his sister to come out at the time when John would have been walking up that driveway. And he didn't see John. So this is the problem with the way these guys like Turtle Boy just selectively try to highlight things. So they 100% think it's important and believable that Ryan Nagel didn't see John outside the car, but they completely dismiss at the car when they're at the edge of the property and he's driving by. But he completely dismisses the fact that he didn't see John get out of the car and walk up the driveway, which he was much more likely to see. They don't even talk about that. So Turtle Boy replied, yeah, I get that, but I assumed a not guilty voter must have pointed out that none of these people saw John inside or outside the car. Again, nobody saw them in the house either. Nobody saw him walking towards the house. So the juror said there was a lot more strong personalities for the guilty, probably because they were more intelligent. And essentially that made it very difficult for an argument from the opposite side. Turtle says, it's my understanding that the 4 not guilty voters at the end were you. I'm not going to describe. What he describes these people. This is why he shouldn't have been in there. Were these people quiet? They clearly believe Karen Reed was not guilty, but did they try to convince others that she was not guilty? So he says, we did go around the room to speak our piece, explaining why we felt the way we did. But as we went around the room, we realized we were at an impasse because several people simply wouldn't answer, no matter how much evidence was presented showing reasonable doubt. But none of those things show reasonable doubt to me. They're just odd things or things that you're talking about things that witnesses didn't see. 9-3 is pretty close to getting a verdict. Wow, Turtle actually did notice something. There is a sign of, that's 9. He's correct. 9-3 is pretty close to getting Karen to go into jail for a very long time for manslaughter, for OUI manslaughter. Did the guilty voters at that point put pressure on the 3 remaining? So, because it's 9-3, you would think they had more pressure to try to get a decision. There was, the juror said, which is why it went from 6-6 to 9-3. It was because there was a little bit of, I don't want to say coercion, but they stressed she was under the influence of alcohol and that she should be guilty of some sort of crime related to that. I doubt that's what was said, and that's why they settled on an involuntary manslaughter. A lot of individuals changed their vote because they were convinced she was operating the vehicle while intoxicated and likely killed them by accident. So it sounds like you had 6 people that just were adamantly convinced that she was guilty, at the very least of manslaughter. And then there were 3 people that reluctantly said, yeah, she was drunk and she probably did it by accident. But this is also where it becomes interesting. Is it a good strategy for the state to pursue the second-degree charge? Maybe had they not pursued the second-degree charge, you would have started out here 9-3, and then maybe had an easier time moving the last 3. Because it sounds like 9 of them from the very start believed that Karen did it, but 3 of them were just a little bit reluctant, maybe because of the second-degree part. Next question was, what did you think of the inverted video? Did you feel intentionally deceived? And he said it was confusing because you would have to videotape the video. Okay, that's actually not true, but I don't blame this juror for not understanding that. I didn't understand it either. Immediately while this happened during the trial, I started researching it, and people like Tom Fleming, who has more professional training with photography and stuff like that, said, no, this is something that is commonly done within the system. It records you in an inverted state and then flips it back. So it has to do with playback and different things like that. But it has nothing to do with somebody recording this. This must be an older juror too. Like, I don't mean older, like older, but like my age maybe, or who's thinking that to get that inversion, they made a videotape on it of a TV screen. No, that's not what happened. But he said that's what we came up with. So it sounds like the other jurors thought it was something like that too. So they must have discussed it. We did discuss it, but by that point, it didn't matter because the guilty voters were convinced that there was no planted taillight. So they must have discussed that too. So it didn't really matter what happened in that garbage. I think that meant garage, or if the video was inferred, which is actually 100% true. Other than the jarring, shocking moment of it, any logical person thinking this through understood that it wasn't done on purpose because it was so easily undone when you saw the lettering on they had a classic squad car there that you could see was mirror image, and same thing with the 6 or whatever number on the door, 4 or something like that. So no. Why did people believe it wasn't planted? Now, interesting that the juror brought that up first. The defense created the idea that the taillight was broken when she collided with John's car backing up. guilty voters believe this didn't make any sense because there would be broken taillight in John's driveway, and there's not. We all felt that it wasn't as credible. We believe that the individual who put the car on the flatbed in Dighton, the tow truck driver, would have been a valuable witness to the defense. They could talk about the condition of the taillight. So it sounds like that some of these jurors in the not guilty side had some questions about the taillight, but most of them didn't. And it doesn't sound like anybody believed that she broke it in the driveway. But or she could have, the defense theory would also be that she cracked it in the driveway, and the conspirators later took advantage of that by prying off pieces. He says, I do wonder why they didn't call the tow truck driver. Again, anybody the defense didn't call for a reason. But let's talk about the Dighton police officer, Nicholas, he says Barron, I think it's Barrows, who testified that the taillight was cracked, not destroyed. He said it twice. That is not what he said. What he said was part of it was intact, it was cracked, and then it was also missing pieces. Now, you can reject that testimony and say he was just trying to please the prosecution, but he 100% said that taillight was missing pieces. Now, for me, I have no problem in even theorizing that maybe Officer Barrows did skew his testimony a little bit to make the prosecution happy, but not because he saw an intact taillight, but because think about how this taillight looked at the time. All right. The part that, if you're looking at it from behind, it's mostly intact, and it's only you see a broken part on the corner, which you can clearly see if you look, for instance, at the 822 dash cam video. But the larger pieces missing are more visible from the side. But also where the pieces are missing, that creates a gap in the housing. So picture the housing where the bulbs are inside, and then on the outside, you have this taillight plastic that is almost like a cover fitting over it. If you remove part of that cover and it's snowing out very hard and blowing very hard, what's going to happen inside that housing? It's going to fill with snow. So that taillight, when they saw it in Dighton, would have been covered with snow and filled with snow. And it's dark and it's blowing wind. And they got there. So I don't know exactly what time they got there, but the light would have been fading. So they towed it at 4:18. I think they said they talked to Karen for 45 minutes. So they must have been there at the very least by 3. Let's say 3 o'clock. They had to trudge through drifted snow that was very deep. Had to have a plow come in to plow it out so they could get that truck on, get that the SUV on the tow truck. So very difficult conditions. 50-mile-an-hour winds, snowing hard still, sun setting, dark. You don't want to touch the vehicle. It's evidence. And that housing is packed with snow, and then there's more snow packing all around it. So it's not like he sat there and took detailed notes. He just described it as damaged. But if you want to take his testimony at face value, he absolutely said, even though Turtle Boy wants to pretend he didn't, that it was missing pieces. He did say it. So you can go back and listen to it. If you are inclined to believe Turtle Boy, and let's say you're not sure if the guy from the Yellow Cottage is telling us the truth, or if Turtle Boy's telling you the truth. Like many other times, here's an example. You can go and check it for yourself. Go look at Officer Barrow's testimony and see if Turtle Boy told you the truth or if the guy in the Yellow Cottage told you the truth. Every time it'll come out, Turtle Boy didn't tell you the truth. Every time. So talking about that, the juror replied, those individuals who felt she was guilty didn't look at stuff like that because they were stuck on the other things, text stream data, alcohol consumption. But I agree, it would have been beneficial to the defense to cross-examine Barrows and show him a picture of the taillight. Yeah, I guess they didn't cross-examine him. I don't even remember. Yeah, that's so again, Kerry Roberts said it was in pieces. They didn't cross-examine him. Her. Officer Dighton said it. They didn't cross-examine him. So, I mean, how much believing in this stuff at some point is like believing in the abominable snowman. It's crazy. So he asked, as a first responder, would you have done it? What would you have done if you came across the scene? And this is a good question. If you came across the scene and heard Karen say, I hit him, would you inform the police on the spot so she doesn't leave? I think these are reasonable questions. I think the answer is that in the chaos of the moment, it took hours for all this to come together. But unfortunately, in that's also why the statements at the scene by Karen should not be heavily relied on, because there isn't a human tendency for those first responders to get their story together later on. So, all right. So he said the scene would have been chaotic. Unless she was that expressive, I would have dismissed what she said and focused on patient care. So he's an EMT. Good answer. This is another indication that it's not Turtle Boy making this up, because Turtle Boy wouldn't have said that. I would have hoped that law enforcement picked up on that, unless, of course, at the hospital, I wanted to give reports to the nurses and the doctors. So we do know that Katie McLaughlin, I believe, when Karen was making that statement, I hit him, she called over one of the cops. So that did happen. They want to make fun of Katie McLaughlin, but she did exactly what they said she should have done, right? So I think Katie was an excellent witness. Firefighters Filmati and Nuttall both testified that they did not inform doctors at Good Samaritan that Karen said, I hit him. As a matter of fact, they weren't even interviewed by the police until February 7th. So I understand that in the heat of the moment, they wouldn't tell police this. But wouldn't you tell police about it after things calmed down and the investigation began? He said he would, if you remembered it. Do you think it was strange that these firefighters didn't offer any of this to the police until the police came to them 10 days later? So in deliberations, we didn't really look at that. We accepted their testimony and didn't really look at this as evidence about whether or not she was guilty. I want to repeat that. So in deliberations, we didn't really look at that. We accepted their testimony and didn't really look at this as evidence about whether or not she was guilty. I hit him was not testimony that we considered to determine guilt or lack thereof. This is what I've been saying. And for our side of the argument, I think I've been the only one saying it. Right? I mean, and people get mad at me too. People get mad at me on this side if I say things that they don't agree with. You do. Some of you guys do. So it's okay. I'm not starting a fight with you. Just saying. But the jurors seem to have approached this the same way I thought they would. That this was witness testimony. It could be hearsay. It's a possibility they got their story together unintentionally back at the firehouse, and your story fermented in your mind over time, and then they were interviewed over a week later. That's reasonable. That's reasonable for a jury to make that conclusion. You don't want to send someone to jail on something based on that. So was it useful evidence? Yes, I do think it comes, as I've always said, it comes lower on the pyramid. But it's still, when you put it in there, it still matters. But it's lower on the pyramid. He said, what we looked at a lot was the testimony of the medical examiner who put what the cause of death was, which was a fracture at the base of the skull. And the point of impact was from behind. And there's arm injuries and hypothermia. So could that be related to the backing up of the car? And the guilty voters felt that the car must have impacted him somehow. The not guilty voters felt those injuries were not normal injuries to a pedestrian strike, and the damage to the car didn't correlate to hitting someone as large as John. Yes, this is the heart of the case. I've always said so. All right. And this was the problem. So, and it sounds like they left even the guilty jurors to say, well, we don't know for sure how John died, but it must have been from the car. That is not a way to win a case. Now, fortunately, there was so much evidence there that enough jurors stuck with this, or we probably wouldn't even be having a second trial. Karen be free. But you cannot go into a case without having a convincing theory about what happened to the victim. Are you kidding me? Somebody in the DA's office thought that was a good idea? Thought that would work? You thought that would work just because you had a bunch of firefighters who weren't talked to for over a week? They were going to say that was going to be the basis for convicting him? I don't know, guys. I don't know. It's frustrating. I'm sorry. I find it frustrating that people who are someone like Lally is a great citizen, working hard. But come on, guys. Jesus. You really thought that you could get away with not explaining this adequately to a jury? I don't really understand it. In your opinion, but in the opinions of the guilty voters, they were consistent, right? So according to the juror, they looked at the text stream data, the guilty voters, and the fact that John was injured and died, and that Karen was driving a car. So just the basic hard, overview of the facts. So this was interesting. He said, you said the engineer, there was a lot of good jurors on this. One of them was an engineer. The engineer pointed out his background in engineering to discredit the ARCA experts. So the engineer was discrediting the ARCA experts. Boy, I'd love to hear what he said. Did you mention that you were an EMT? And did other jurors ask your opinion based on your expertise? They did. They asked experts in the group during deliberations about their opinions. Anyone who was medical, they asked what their opinions were. One of those experts was a nurse who was a not guilty verdict. So I guess they didn't listen to her. Now, there's a lot of nurses who are interested in this case. And I've heard very divided opinion from them. I've heard a lot of nurses that have said, yeah, no, the state's case is correct. That is what caused that injuries. But I have heard some other nurses, and a lot of nurses are strangely attracted to Turtle Boy in this case and have said no. So I don't know, but it's divided. Just because you're a nurse doesn't mean you're an expert in accident reconstructions, pedestrian strikes, things like that. That's why you have to have the proper expert in. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're an expert in that. Just because you're a medical examiner. Well, it should be if you're a medical examiner, a little bit closer, but so he said we had reasonable doubt. But again, the others looked at the text stream data and ignored the experts. So that text stream data, over and over, he mentions this. One of the instructions from the judge was not to ignore the data and use our life experiences. So they looked at it. As Karen was drunk, she backed up, and there were injuries that led to John's death. So for them, in their minds, there was guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Did the jurors find it odd that Michael Proctor found large pieces of taillight on February 18th? That's 3 weeks later, bigger than the previous pieces of the taillight he previously found. Those who believed the taillight was there and not planted, their argument was that when this occurred, there wasn't enough snowfall. So it was a different layers of the snow and likely the lowest level. So that's why as the snow melted. All right, this is really a jumble of an explanation. And again, I'm sure there's a problem with the translation. But I think what they're saying is, again, there was, when the taillight first went onto the ground, there was very little snow there. And then it was covered. And then later on, more was exposed as it melted. And as it continued to melt, they found more. He said they never pointed out where each piece was found, but Turtle pointed out they actually did testify where each piece was found. Do you think this confusion was a byproduct of not being able to review transcripts of the testimony? And he says, I think eventually they did, and that was pointing it out. I mean, I think he means, but it wasn't as organized as you would expect they would have. Yeah, again, everything about this case was not organized. No charts, no maps. You should show a map saying this is where the pieces were found and when. I don't know, maybe there was, I didn't see that. You didn't see a lot of graphic displays. You're expecting these guys to remember all this testimony. So extra important. Create the time. Give them the timeline that I created with the help of Chick from the Bricks. Give them that timeline. That'll do it. We can make more. They should have shown us a nice map, and it seemed like the taillight was all in one area, which is inconsistent if they actually searched that small area. So some jurors looked at it as taillight could have been in different spots in the yard, and we looked at the idea of whether or not the leaf blower would have moved the taillight to different spots in the yard. The majority believed the taillight was already there and continued to find it as snow continued to melt. Yes, it's not really hard to understand. You have a spray pattern that was found by Trooper Paul, identified, as the locations was. That's how he was able to determine the rough area of the location of the point of impact within 5 feet. But there are going to be outline pieces of taillight that flew out further. Maybe they bounced off something. The street was plowed. Maybe it got plowed away. I don't think the leaf blower would blow it. You could see when you look at the video, it was very gentle the way the process was there. So I don't think that blew any pieces of taillight, certainly not any large pieces of taillight. But it even could have been done by the CERT police. So the CERT team didn't come in with a leaf blower. They came in with 7 guys and shovels. And they shoveled out a spot. And so I think one of the troopers, maybe O'Hara, talked about how they would you put the shovel in the snow and you pull it out and you kind of look through it and sift it on a spot looking for the pieces. But they did pretty quick work. They started around 5:40 and were done by 6:20 and left the area. So the area that they shoveled out was surprisingly small. It was only, if you look at it in the pictures, it's about the size of 2 parking spaces. So I don't know. If you ask me, not a very motivated CERT team. They should have shoveled out a much larger area, and it wouldn't have been that much harder either. Now, put in an extra half hour's worth of work, but they didn't do it. But I think that's the reason. Those pieces could have been moved around by a shovel, or they just could have been random outlier pieces that when they went out. So Turtle Boy says, it sounds like it's safe to say the taillight evidence factored much more into the minds of the guilty voters than I hit him. He said, correct. So again, it's the physical evidence. Jurors don't want to send someone to jail based on something that is a witness testimony that may not be 100% accurate. And I'm not talking about lying, but something could be missed. Something could be out of context, As Karen said, there could be a question mark. He says, so Turtle Boy asks, you mentioned that you or the engineer believed at one time that John fell backwards because he perceived a threat. What did you mean by that? One of the theories we deliberated on was if you see a car backing up and based on your perception, you actually try to avoid it, John could have seen the car backing up at a high rate of speed and he actually ultimately fell back. Of course, the taillight broke. And in the process of falling back, could the car have been brushed him and broke the taillight? Well, I don't think that's the way it happened, but I think it's reasonable for them to be asking those kind of questions. And it's unfortunate that they do because the state didn't put forward a very effective theory, an explanation of what happened. So, all right. And because you're imbalanced, he goes on, and intoxicated, you fall back. Right before he fell straight back, could there have been impact of the taillight on the arm? If there was someone good in physics who could have explained that for the prosecution, that would have been beneficial. But no witness said that. It was based on Trooper Paul's testimony, and he said John did that pirouette that everyone laughed about. So instead of that theory, we discussed if John, instead of being able to move out of the way, did he fall straight back, but in the motion of him falling back, the car impacted his arm. So this is the bottom line is, again, this is what I keep saying, but the jury had to figure out because the state didn't tell them. The jury had enough evidence to believe that Karen did it, but they couldn't figure out what happened because the state failed to tell them what happened in an effective way. That can't happen in a murder trial, guys. I'm sorry. That can't happen in a murder trial. There's no excuse for it. I don't really want to hear anymore about how hard someone works. That can't fucking happen in a murder trial. You're possibly you have someone that's dead and you have someone that's possibly going to jail for life. And you can't present a jury after 2 years of preparation a coherent theory about what happened. There's no excuse for that. I'm sorry. There's no excuse for that. Could a video recreation with a crash dummy or a computer simulated program have been beneficial? Yes, I think it could have been beneficial for both sides if the prosecution could show us a video showing us how John was hit, or if the defense could refute that. It couldn't help either side. and also a witness who has some sort of background in physics or engineering. I think Trooper Paul was a new guy who they put on the case, and they didn't realize it was going to be such a big case, and he just never did his research. Never did his research. Even if you don't know at the time, immediately you could do more research. Look, I had that same impression, just being honest, during the trial. And in fact, I think I said something that maybe he wasn't that experienced, and then people corrected me, and I found out that he is very, was their most experienced guy and is training the other guys. But yeah, it's whatever the reason, there were a lot of things that he either didn't know or didn't explain, and those things are important. I already mentioned the trips on the key cycle. What causes key cycles? How it works. There was a brief explanation, but it didn't really cover it. And there was just a lot of things that weren't explained well. Some of that's on Lally. You bring it out. Bring it out with your questions, brother. That's your job. That's your job, dude. Did the jurors find the McAlberts to be dishonest? Colin Albert said he cut his knuckles slipping on the ice and he'd never been in a fight. Brian Albert said that he had his butt answered the phone while having sex with his wife. I don't believe Brian said that on the stand. I think he may have testified something similar to that another time, but I don't think he mentioned that in the stand. I don't know. Jen McCabe said that the 20 deleted phone calls were never actually deleted. They weren't. That was explained by the experts. That was explained, Turtle, and you know that. Again, if he's not going to tell you the truth about Barrows saying they were missing pieces, what else is he not going to tell you the truth about? What the deletions were just files moving around. And it comes out in a report deleted, but no information was deleted. Katie McLaughlin said that she barely knew Caitlin Albert. If jurors thought they were lying, then how could they trust or believe anything else they said? So this is the thing. I think it's a misconception, this idea that if you catch a witness in anything at all that is suspect, that might not be the whole truth, then therefore they're lying about everything. Yes, the witness goes up and is under oath, but we're all human beings. Use your real life experience. There are things you might not tell the truth about that have nothing to do with the case. Not in this trial, but in some other trial, maybe you're sleeping with another guy's wife and it's not relevant and you don't want to ruin that marriage and you don't want to ruin your own. So whatever reason you lie about it. Maybe you have things on your phone that you don't want people to see, or things that you think that are going to be exploited to make you look in a bad light, even though they might have been just jokes. There's a million things. So these things don't come down to the idea that these witnesses were lying. On the whole, they were credible. All of them. So was there something on some witnesses that might have, most of the stuff that they're talking about here is kind of offensive to just call it lies. Again, I find it kind of ironic, somebody like Aidan Kearney even using the word lies, but, or even David Yannetti. He had to be called to task by the judge and by the prosecution for things that he had said that aren't true in this case, in official documents. So let's throwing around this word lies. No. So the juror replied, one of the things that we looked at was whether or not each witness was credible. So they did look at that. But ultimately, guilty voters thought that the testimony of them wasn't really important. Right? So this is a shock to the free Karen Read world. They didn't think that the testimony of the McCabe's or the Alberts was that important. They looked more at the text stream data. I'm reading this. They looked at the evidence that she was served a lot of alcohol and operated a vehicle, that she was with John at one point outside the house. So there's no question she dropped him off there, right? So she's the last person, even by her own statement, that was known to be with him. And that ultimately John died during that time frame. So Turtle says, right, because if he didn't go into the house, then Karen Read did it. Okay. Again, I want to repeat, this is Aidan Kearney saying this. If he didn't go in the house, then Karen Read did it. Now, one thing that Turtle Boy never that I know of, I don't watch his show, but points out, well, if you guys watch the show, you tell me, does Turtle Boy ever point out that the GPS on John's phone shows that he never went inside the house? Does Turtle Boy ever discuss that? I'm just curious. Does he at least have a theory on that? So, for instance, you might have a theory that the phone didn't go in the house, but John did. But you got to have a theory. You can't just ignore it. That's a fundamental key piece of evidence. That's something that Nurse Kim would just ignore. She won't even look at it. Well, she'll give you some kind of weird answer. Wow, who knows about data this and data that? No, that's fundamental data. That's GPS. It's used to fly a missile through a window 2,000 miles away. It's fundamental data. It's not something that's fudgeable. But if that's what you believe, if you believe that data was somehow made up, okay, but the defense didn't suggest that. So why would you believe that they made up that GPS data when the defense didn't say that? They never did. The only thing the defense tried to question was and showed no evidence of it, but they did the best they could by questioning the timing, saying that GPS was linked to a clock that was different on the phone that might have been as much as 3 minutes off. It was weird, but it was the best they could do. But they never said the GPS itself signal was wrong. So even if it was 3 minutes off, it still would show that John never went in the house. I've said it before. For those of you who might be new here, I'll say it really succinctly, I promise. The GPS establishes where you are normally when it's getting plenty of signal for a margin of error of, say, 15 feet. And you could be anywhere within that radius, but it's very accurate. But if the signal weakens, that margin of error expands. But you know exactly when it weakens, it's recorded. The only time it weakened on John's phone was for a 2-second period and no more, and no other times. And at that time, it was right around 12:25. It weakened enough where that margin of error expanded to include the house. Now, at that moment when that happened was when John was sitting in the car or located near where he was found, eventually at the far edge of the property. At no point was there any signal that showed him moving in the direction of the house or walking up the driveway. And again, it was only 2 seconds anyway. So you would almost have to believe that he flew out of the car into the house and flew back out and got to where he was all within 2 seconds. So you'd have to believe he flew into the house, got attacked by a dog, beat up, and then carried back out in 2 seconds. Or you have to accept that the phone never went in the house. And once you accept the phone that never went in the house, then you obviously have to throw out the idea. Turtle Boy didn't even bring this up in the interview. So at this point, I think it's dead. He didn't bring up the idea of John walking up and down the stairs. So I think by now, even Aidan has let go of that. I know Nick Rocco is probably never going to let go of it. But John never went up and down stairs. And he certainly couldn't have if he never went in the house. And that's what the GPS shows. He didn't go in the house. So now you're stuck with the theory. Did John go in the house without his phone? Okay, let's examine that. But they don't do this. I mean, you have to examine this. And at least if you're going to try to come up with some hypothetical theory, you have to do that. But they don't do it. But let's try, right? So the phone was found at the far edge of the property underneath John's body. So 6-7 feet onto the lawn. And that was also its last known GPS position from 12:25. Karen says that she dropped John off at the foot of the driveway and watched him walk up to the house. She seems to have said she watched him start to go into the house or poke his head in or something. And then she turned down to look at her phone. But she certainly saw him walk up to the house. So let's say, in theory, he dropped his phone on the car seat and then went into the house. And Karen's so mad at him that when she's driving away, she throws the phone out into the yard. But nobody's suggesting that. The defense didn't suggest that. Karen hasn't said that. Turtle, to my knowledge, hasn't said that. So how does Karen see John walking up the driveway And at that point, they haven't gone to the other edge of the property where the phone was found. How does the phone get over there? And again, it was never in the house. So you can't try to suggest that that the conspirators lit. In fact, before I knew all the data over a year ago, I toyed with the idea that John went into the house, got beat up, and the phone came out in the fight. And Brian Albert, being an elite law enforcement officer, understood the need to get rid of that and threw it out into the yard. That was an idea that I entertained in the very early weeks of this. But no, the GPS shows that couldn't have happened. And also the health app data shows that. But the GPS shows that didn't happen. So how can they explain Karen saying that John got out in the driveway, but yet the phone ended up where she parked, which is probably about 50, 60 feet forward? They can't just ignore that. If you want to run around in Dedham waving pink signs, wearing pink clothing, doing weird dances on the street, that's your prerogative. But if you are in any way a fair person, you're going to say, how did this potentially happen? You can't just ignore it. Now, something like, why didn't Chloe bark? And maybe Chloe did bark and nobody heard her. I don't know. But something like that is just pales in comparison to these essential, fundamental questions that the people on this side just ignore. I don't get it. But it sounds like this, at least most of the jurors were trying to avoid ignoring things like that. Just reading the next question. So is it safe to say that they did feel that Colin Albert was lying about his knuckles, but it didn't matter because they thought the text stream data was more important? So the juror says, honestly, some of the guilty voters didn't think he was lying. That being said, some individuals did agree that it was very scripted and they always had an answer for everything. And they might be talking about, in that case, Chris and his wife saying what time they get home. They always had an excuse for why something wasn't the norm. It was very strange, and that was noted by many on the jury. But others just had it in their minds that she was guilty, so it didn't matter. So it doesn't sound like they spent a lot of time talking about Colin or Higgins. So I don't know where they're going to go next. Did the jurors think Jen McCabe's search for how long to die in the cold? This is interesting. And Turtle says, if they couldn't be sure either way, wasn't that reasonable doubt for Karen? And it's really not. It's really not. If you have other data, other evidence and other data, and then you have something like that, if the prosecution presents something as a key piece of data, but then there's doubt about it, then that would create reasonable doubt. So if, for instance, if there was doubt about the data showing that Karen went in reverse for 25 miles an hour for 62 feet, then yes, that would create reasonable doubt. But this is something that the defense has said happened, not something that the prosecution said happened. So I think Turtle Boy's confused here. Having a divided opinion on 227 does not create reasonable doubt. You have to believe that 227, there was a good chance that it did happen, that the preponderance of the evidence showed it happened in order for that to add up to reasonable doubt for the prosecution's case, because the prosecution isn't making that claim. So what it was, the juror said they dismissed that as low-hanging fruit. They said it wasn't that important to look at. So he's saying they, though, so he might be just talking about the guilty votes. They viewed it as a distraction and fluff and said that we should be looking more at that she was drunk, drove a car, backed up the car. So he didn't really answer what the non-guilty or even people on the fence thought about that evidence. That's unfortunate. Let's see if he expands on it. But I think we all agree that the Google search happened. I got to think that Turtle meant to have an if in here, but I think we all agree that, oh yeah, I'm sorry, there is an if, yeah. But I think we all agree that if the Google search happened at 227, then it was a conspiracy. So would you not say that much? Yes, definitely. He said, yes, we didn't really spend much time discussing the Google search. All right, so there's a key answer there. They didn't spend much time discussing the 227 search. all that's been wasted on this. And the state had to spend many thousands of dollars to bring in 2 experts to debunk it. Don't get me wrong, it was necessary, but it was just not a factor for the jurors. Some said that it was fluff that designed to convince us that the defense was playing this reasonable doubt thing by introducing all these weird things like the Google search and the dog bites. So yeah, typical defense thing, trying to pull stuff out of left field, get in weird experts that just will say what you want them to say. The focus was, did she do it? He's saying the focus of the jury was, did she do it? And ultimately, the guilty voters felt he keeps repeating this, but drunk accidentally hit him, and that's what killed him. Did jurors find it odd that no conversations with witnesses were recorded? That some witnesses were not spoken to for more than a year, like Colin Albert. Colin wasn't a witness. Colin was not a witness. He never saw John, ever. Never saw Karen's vehicle. Caitlin Albert. Caitlin saw John at the house. I'm sorry, at the waterfall. Caitlin never saw John in the house. And by this point, what was the point of they talked to enough people in the house? The only reason they talked to him was because the defense started putting out this conspiracy theory. So then you had to go button that up. Never talked to Tristan Morris. Tristan Morris had left the waterfall before John arrived there, I believe. Not a witness to anything. So he says some found it odd and some didn't. So they did discuss it then. If someone dies on my front lawn and I said I didn't know how he ended up there, I would think that everyone, including the neighbors, was interviewed. And none of that was gleaned upon the jury. So we don't know if that happened or didn't happen. We just know that this was the pieces of the case that was presented to us. Yeah, so they can only work with what they have. We don't know what they did or didn't do. We can see on either front someone saying what should have happened and another person saying that it probably did happen, and they didn't give us the information because the witnesses didn't see anything. So were jurors aware that both houses across the street from 34 Fairview had Ring camera videos? We weren't. Of course they weren't. That's a stupid question, and really just a stupid point, because anybody that has a Ring system understands that if the sensitivity was set that it's going to record every car going by, you're going to run out of data in a couple of days. So the sensitivity on these things is trying to interpret things that are meaningful. So someone pulling into a driveway, and the Ring system is amazingly, its algorithms are incredible and what it's able to do on that. So we have 2 Ring cameras here, and one of them is facing the street, and they don't record any cars going by, fire trucks, people walking their dog. None of that gets recorded. And it's not that far away. It knows what to record. So it's just kind of weird. All right. Were jurors aware? All right. So I already got that. How did jurors feel about the closing arguments? This is interesting. Some jurors were happy that the closing arguments were kept to an hour because we really just wanted to deliberate. See, that's going to be something that's really helpful to lawyers. So I know that Lally seems to have said that when asked why that key correlation of the data between the vehicle data and Trooper Garino's presentation of John's phone data, why wasn't that put together by one expert? And his answer was, I did it in my closing arguments. But Kevin Mahoney had told me once, a long time ago, that you need to have convinced the jury, you need to have made your case before the closing arguments. Now, obviously, they're still going to deliberate, but so you don't want to be relying on closing arguments to make your case. And it sounds like these jurors really didn't care that much about the closing arguments. They wanted to get on to weighing the evidence that was presented to them. And they considered the closing arguments kind of just to be show. So he says some jurors were happy that closing arguments were kept to an hour because we really just wanted to deliberate. We talked about at the end how one was more powerful than the other. Jackson's closing argument was stronger and it went through everything, but it didn't change the minds of the jurors. We looked at the instructions to see if she was guilty of the 3 charges. We looked at the judge's instructions. All right. Were the text messages with Higgins discussed? It was quickly looked at for a minute or two, and then we moved on. No one thought that Karen killed him on purpose. So it didn't really matter. And what he missed here was, the defense would love them to say, did Higgins do this? But he didn't even interpret that from this question. And this is someone who is a not guilty vote. So that part of the third party culprit failed. Did you decide on the murder charge on the first day? I think we reached a full consensus of not guilty on the second day. Was there any formal votes on the murder charge to see where the group was? We did multiple times, and it was consistent for charges 1 and 3. Eventually, we stopped voting on the murder case charge because it was 12-0 every time, meaning second degree. We spent the last 4 days entirely deliberating on manslaughter. Did the jurors discuss the verdict forms and want clarification? Do they understand it fully? Some individuals were confused about it. So that suggests that the forms do need to be made better. One person read the whole thing out loud and made sure it was clear what the charge was and what we were going to vote for. So it was definitely discussed, and it was clear in individuals' minds what we were actually voting. So he's saying it was clear. And that's what caused us to send the vote that we couldn't reach a consensus. For some individuals, it was very clear that they were not going to move their stance. Were jurors aware that it was multiple possibilities with the evidence? For example, the crash daddies saying that's the ARCA guys saying a vehicle strike was impossible versus Trooper Paul's testimony. That shows reasonable doubt, blah, blah, blah. The piece stuff was the reason that some individuals felt one way versus the other was that they didn't have enough evidence to clearly state there was reasonable doubt. It's an interesting way to put it, right? There wasn't enough reason to say reasonable doubt. But it's just the way that's worded. But I mean, I get it, right? You have a lot of evidence showing Karen did it. And then on the other hand, you just have this really, as fluff as some of the jurors described it, to try to establish reasonable doubt. Nothing really solid. To Turtle Riders, it's solid, right? But to the jurors, no. For those who believe there was reasonable doubt, they thought there were so many other possibilities of how John died. So they did at least consider other possibilities. I think the justice system worked in this case because it wasn't one person determining she was guilty. It was 12 people who ultimately couldn't agree. Let's talk about public opinion. Turtle Boy says that a court TV vote was 90-10 in favor of not guilty. I don't know about that vote or when it was taken, but I guess that's because Nick Rocco was kicking my ass every night. I don't know what to say, but those things tend to be, I don't know where they did that vote, but most of the people that are interested in this case is only because they already believe there's a conspiracy. So it really doesn't take anything to convince them. That's what they're looking for. That's not going to be the same as taking 12 jurors trying to do their job in a room. So it's not going to be the same at all. So he said, I feel there was reasonable doubt based on the medical examiner thought was the cause of death. The injuries are not consistent with a motor vehicle collision. And it sounds like he didn't say that based on what the ARCA guy said, just based on, so this is really important. It doesn't seem like this juror, and maybe all the jurors that were skeptical on this, on the manslaughter charge, it's not that they believe the ARCA guys, it's that they just didn't believe the prosecution gave a good enough explanation. And that's why there was reasonable doubt. And I've said this too. I don't think that any of this had to do with a brilliant presentation by Alan Jackson or the ARCA guys. I think that it would have been the same if the defense didn't even present a case. If they just cross-examined the prosecution's witnesses, I think it would have been the same result. Would you agree that the medical examiner's testimony was inconclusive, which allowed the jurors to come up with their own conclusion? This is important. A lot of individuals who testified left us thinking it could go in either direction. Other than the data showing she backed up and under the influence of alcohol at a time when she was with John and he sustained injuries. I said the data wasn't consistent with being struck by a vehicle, but other people ignored that data and looked at the text stream. So he didn't answer the question for some reason. Have you reached out to the other jurors? Yeah, they have a couple of Facebook groups. It's weird. They have two Facebook groups, one for the jurors and one that's for the jurors and the alternates. So that's really interesting. Those poor alternates got left out at that time and continue to be kind of left out. It does suck for them. So they do talk, and he hasn't told people, but they probably know that he's been talking to Turtle Boy. The foreman filed an affidavit asking for to have his name impounded and specifically mentioned Turtle Boy as a safety threat. I don't bite, Turtle Boy says. I swear. Dude, nobody thinks you bite. I don't think anybody has ever been afraid of Aidan Kearney. Maybe some women. I don't know. It's the mob that you wield and the way that you wield it consciously. Digging for dirt, smearing people, taking something and turning it into something false. Constant. Anybody that disagrees with you, anybody that even disagrees with you a little, anybody that even asks questions. Let's not pretend it's not what this mob doesn't do. And if there's any jurors watching this, if you respect those other jurors that you form a bond with over that time, even though they may have voted different than you, understand what that mob is. If you want to come forward and do interviews, you want to talk to him, you're aligning with a guy that was sitting there trying to out jurors and threatening to out anybody that didn't vote the way they wanted. Make no mistake that that's what he was doing. Don't be unclear in your mind about what this guy is and about what these people are. They will try to destroy you. If they find out that someone voted guilty, they are going to do everything they can to destroy that person. With social media smears, which includes putting fake shit out there. Trust me, that's what they do. So the juror said, I think there's a public perception that the media may be a threat. There is also a perception that law enforcement and other individuals would seek revenge. So he's taking it from the other side, that people on the non-guilty were afraid of having their names out because they thought law enforcement or other individuals would seek revenge on the jury. That's not crazy. I mean, I think it's not realistic, but this is someone, if he works as an EMT, works with closely and hand in hand with law enforcement. So I could see where he might be a little worried that a not guilty vote not lead to threats, but might lead to some ostracization or something. I don't know. But since we last spoke to you, since we last spoke, have you or anyone else in the jury reached out to other jurors to see? So this is about whether or not they would reach out to the judge, and this juror is thinking about it, but if he decides to do it, is going to get legal counsel first. Wrapping this up, he said, do you know if there was an engineer, a lawyer, an EMT, a nurse, a mailman, a physician's assistant, so a pretty educated jury? And he just said, yes, it was an educated jury. One person was also a financial planner. One was a retired teacher. I can confirm that. So yeah, I mean, capable people for the most part. How did you stay awake when Adam Lally droned? We drank a lot of coffee and drank Coke. And when Lally came up with those pieces of taillight and entered each of them into evidence, it was tough. Well, some of that they have to go through. But yeah, there's ways to do things that is less monotonous. And then he's had a bunch of quick questions or yes or no kind of questions. But some of these are okay. So did you discuss during deliberations the hair on the car? Yes. The glass on the bumper? Yes. Nicholas Barrow's testimony. That's a Dighton cop. Yes. The Apple Health app data going up, showing John supposedly going 3 flights of stairs. He said yes. So we don't know. It wasn't discussed earlier, but he did bring it up there. The 227 search. Yes. The 911 call and how Jennifer McCabe sounded. Yes. But I doubt that. I don't think the juror missed. I don't think he understood Turtle's question here. One of the more absurd things in a whole length of absurd things that are said by these people is that Jen McCabe sounded cold because she didn't say John's name on the 911 call. That's absurd. You would never say that. And she didn't even actually, even though she would have suspected it was John, she probably didn't know, because at the time she made the call, it was just somebody that was buried in the snow. As Kerry Roberts testified, when they pulled up, John was completely buried, and she thought it was a mound of snow. So, but also, that's not the way a 911 call works. And I've made many from my time owning a bar, and you just give them the basic information. You're not doing a 2020 interview. The dash cam videos, yes, they discussed it. Katie McLaughlin's association with the Albert family, not really, a little bit, but not significant. Michael Proctor's association with the Albert family, not really. So that was not really a factor for them. Brian Tully's involvement with the CERT team search. No, what involvement? He stood there overseeing it. Jesus. There's no suspicion on Brian Tully. Just Turtle doesn't like him because he arrested Turtle Boy. Names of the officers involved in the CERT team. I never heard of this being an issue. I never heard of this. But and then he says a little. Because the only officer from the CERT team that testified was Lieutenant O'Hara, right? So I don't really know what this means. A little, but stopped after looking at the video showing how long it would have taken the car to get. All right, so how long it would have taken. So they did discuss this. This is important. They stopped looking at stuff like that. So I think what the juror interpreted this question was he interpreted Turtle's question was stupid, but he interpreted it more intelligently and said, did they discuss the timing of the CERT team search? And I'm thinking, because he said they looked at it a little bit, the video showing how long it would have taken the car to get to the Canton police station. So again, we saw what time it left Dighton. That was at 4:18, and it pulled into, I think what he means by the video is it pulled in up to the Sallyport in Canton at 5:31 and pulled into the garage at 5:36. There was no time to tamper with the vehicle and get pieces to the evidence and bury him there. This is something that came up a lot on Court TV, and Nick found it very important. And actually, Vinny Politan harped on this a lot. And that's the subject of Brian Higgins' white Jeep, which had a plow on it. But the juror said, nope, didn't come up. Brian Higgins' behavior and whereabouts that night after leaving the Albert's house barely came up. Brian Albert not coming out of the house. This was so big for everybody, right? And still is. They didn't even think twice about that. They didn't even think twice about it. It's so big to everyone in the Free Karen Reed army. This is on the top 5 list for them believing in this conspiracy. I mean, I think every single, probably even top 3. They believe there's a conspiracy because Brian and Nicole didn't come out, or that Brian didn't come out, that nobody woke up inside the house. But the jurors didn't even think twice about that. And this was a juror that, ended up somewhere on the not guilty on manslaughter. And so was open to those things. Very interesting. Jennifer McCabe's 2 phone calls to Nicole inside that it came up as answered on the Celebrite report. No. See, that just meant it went to voicemail. These jurors were smart enough to understand that. Turtle Boy's not smart enough to understand it. Or he's just trying to trick his followers as usual. Another big one, the Ford Edge that Lucky saw. Did they discuss it? Briefly, he said, but not extensively, because it was dismissed as a distractor. They're calling it a distractor. In other words, they called it as fluff. So this is what I'm saying. Juries want to boil it down to the essential evidence, the hard evidence. And that's what they wanted. And all this superficial stuff, they didn't care about. Or they barely cared about it. People in Free Karen Reed land care a lot about that stuff. The juries don't. And that's because their juries are forced to be more logical. So Turtle Boy's conclusion on this was, it's just wild to me how we've spent 18 months analyzing every aspect of this case, and ultimately the people tasked with deciding Karen Reed's fate completely disregarded everything that had to do with the McAlberts. But at least Karen Reed's defense can use this information to pick a better jury next time. Well, they don't just get to pick the jury. I don't know how that's going to work, but that would be an interesting question. Is this information more useful to the prosecution or the defense? Personally, I think it's way more useful to the prosecution. Way more useful. But we'll see. Right. But all these things that Turtle Boy in his little mind has convinced himself are important, or has tried to convince you of and me of that it's important. When people sit down and go over all of the evidence logically, like a jury has to do, they don't get just to see the parts that they see someone talking about in their blog or on YouTube or on court TV. They have to go through all of it, and they have to do it seriously with the weight of of the consequences for Karen and for John's family on their shoulders. They eliminate all the weird stuff and just focus on the important stuff. And let's get to the reaction. Have to thank some people first. So, Blanco, good to see you, my friend. Blanco's a very cool dude, and he has joined up as a new member. Great. Thank you, Blanco. Maui Swift gifted Yellow Cottage Tales memberships to people. Thank you for your support always, Maui. Ken the plumber. We all know who Ken is. I haven't heard from him in a while. Remember when Karen said she didn't want her life in the hands of 12 people too dumb to get out of jury duty? Yep, she said that. She did say it. But they were not dumb, and neither are you and I. We can see through the evidence. We can see through the Karen Reed charade. Beauty is her name. Thank you for the contribution. I appreciate it. And she says, I think it's a she. I assume. Who did Karen Reed text that? Oh, it's a her. Yeah. Beauty is her name. So it's a she. Who didn't Karen Reed text that she didn't want her hands, or who did Karen Reed text that she didn't want discussed? Oh, no, I don't think it was Karen Reed. I think what the Turtle Boy said was Proctor. So, I mean, he texted his sister. He texted his friends from high school, right? And they revealed the text in court. So I don't know what difference it would have been having him on the stand. I don't know. Was Turtle Boy trying to imply there was some text, like secret texts in the morning, giving him his marching instructions on how to plant evidence? All that would have been exposed. The feds had all his information. So, but thank you guys. I appreciate the contribution. Let's go to the reaction from the Karen Reed crowd. All right. This is from Aidan Kearney, his Twitter post. Yesterday, I spent 90 minutes interviewing the same Karen Reed juror I spoke with Friday. This time I was more prepared, and I'm just blown away by some of the things he said. They completely disregarded everything that McAlbert said and didn't even discuss Michael Proctor's relationship with the Alberts or Brian Albert not coming out of the house. This is why I say, did this interview with this not guilty vote juror really destroyed Free Karen Reed? For any remaining rational people inside the Free Karen Reed movement, it kind of does, because they really dismissed almost all the evidence that these people focus on. And again, this was a not guilty vote. And admittedly, 6 of the jurors were guilty on manslaughter right out of the gate when they got into the deliberation room. And then another 3 converted. So that means at best, there were 3 people that believe maybe John was killed in the house. And we have not, and Turtle Boy's interviewed 2 of them, and neither one came out and said they believe John was killed in the house. So why is it that so many people believe this? None of the juries have come out and said they believe the troopers were corrupt. None of them. But yet tens of thousands in this horde believe that as an article of religious faith. Why is that? So the first comment was the jurors got it wrong because they're in denial about how bad the corruption is. Again, this is what bothers me about this case. People just look at other things and connect dots. It's all corruption. Look at Birchmore. It's all corruption. There's not even any indications at this point that there was any corruption in the Birchmore case. And there's definitely no evidence of corruption in the Karen Reed investigation. Zero. Now, there may be something that emerges, but the feds have dug harder into this case. They've left no stone unturned. They went after all the communications of all the people that the defense team named, which is really a shocking violation of our civil rights. But they didn't find anything. Nothing. They found nothing. So there's no evidence of corruption. There's no evidence of any corruption, let alone something that would be required in this case, like planting evidence. Susan says, this is Boozy Susie. I am very shocked and surprised by this. Not kidding. I had a feeling it was all related to Karen possibly driving intoxicated. That's all it was. They didn't consider the evidence involved. No, they did. Thomas Michaels said, there's something terribly wrong here. Even though this juror voted not guilty, I'm still troubled by the ease in which important pieces of evidence were just glossed over. The 227 Google search didn't matter? What? Are you insane, Thomas Michael? You just accept that the 227 search happened, even though two much more highly qualified experts, including from the company that designed the software that came up with that, came out and explained why it didn't happen? You still believe it? This is why I say it's an article of faith. There's nothing you can say to these people. Nothing. There's nothing you can say. So, and also the logic of knowing that Karen Reed asked the paramedic on the ambulance the same question. It's crazy. And you believe that that Jen McCabe was making that search while she was also looking up her daughter's basketball team and contacting the coach. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense to say. Listen, it just doesn't make sense to sane people. There's no nice way to say it. I know Tom will get mad at me. Kev, be nice. But I'm sorry. There's just no sane way to make sense of that. Karen Reed Updates says, what the fuck? Half Hammer. Half Hammer it's going to be stupid. I can promise you that without even reading it. There has to be a better way. Jurors are in the worst position to determine someone's guilt or innocence. Jurors. I told you it was going to be stupid. Can't have any knowledge about the case prior or talk about it. Can't review testimony in mass. Can't review evidence in mass. And must rely solely on notes. I told you it was going to be stupid. I did promise that, right? So he doesn't believe jurors should be making the decision. I guess he believes Karen Reed should be making her own decision, maybe, or Turtle Boy. Let's just appoint Turtle Boy as judge and jury. Or does he think we should do a poll? Let's do a media poll based on what people see on YouTube channels. This is crazy. And this is someone that's been following this case prominently since the beginning. And he's complaining about can't have any knowledge about the case prior or talk about it. So he wants these people to come in to the case, into a jury, with their minds already influenced by heavily watching a turtle blog or whatever else is in the media, whatever other crazy shit is on YouTube. This is unbelievable. Joe Allen Aman said, I am so frustrated by this. The defense should have brought the tow truck driver. This is scary, but really good info. The problem is the next jury might see things completely different. What one sees as important might not be important here. This is scary for Karen. All right, Joellen, start asking yourself why the majority of the jurors dismiss the things that you think are important. And I'm not asking you to switch your position, but just at least ask, is there maybe a possibility that you haven't looked at this in the right way, that you're overvaluating certain evidence, that you haven't heard the actual explanations for some things? For instance, why they towed the vehicle to the Sally Port. We now know that was the norm. That was the way it was going to be done. There's a lot. And so most of the odd things in the case have been explained. Are you aware of that? Are you willing to go back and look? I mean, these jurors were intelligent. They were very educated. And the majority of them believed, 9 of them believed, that Karen struck John. So if the state does a better, and the state did a bad job. So if they do a better job next time, yikes, watch out. Colin Sheehan says, seems like some of the jurors didn't do their job looking at all the evidence. No, they did. You don't look at all the evidence. I mean, look at even just in Turtle Boy's interview, all the false things that he said. He should be doing a presidential debate. I think this is a spelling mistake, but Amanda says the crash daddies are psychics. I think she meant to say physics experts. But I think some of these free Karen Reed people will be better off focusing on psychics. Did they miss all that part? Maybe they need to draft a detailed report and diagram or a microdot reenactment. Yeah, so they couldn't weigh the evidence without microdots. I mean, are you kidding me? Microdots just put out a crazy Turtle Boy theory that doesn't match the evidence, and he didn't even accurately. So Ryan Nagel testified that what he could see on Karen's vehicle was the brake lights in her window. And we could see that same thing in her window in the driveway video. It's a model that has a light in the back window that lights up with the brake lights. But he didn't put that in his Lexus. Now, I'm not trying to, it's hard. It's hard making those things. So I'm not trying to abuse him for that. He's a creative guy. He knows how to make shit. But if you think that is evidence, no, it's a video that's really there for entertainment more than anything. Rando Grumpo, mind blown that terrifying that most of these jurors didn't follow the case. Don't you at least ask yourself if maybe they followed it more closely than you? They had to be in the courtroom for the entire case. Is it possible that you don't follow the case? You only follow what very biased sources that aren't interested in the truth tell you about the case. Did you actually listen to every minute of the trial, Rando Grumpo? Or did you just listen to what Turtle Boy and Brian LTL and the Glare tell you happened? Do you actually think that those guys are interested in the truth? Because you know they're not. Lally voted them so badly their brains melted. I don't know what that means. Yeah. All right. So that's enough on the comments. It gives you an idea. Let me scroll through, see if I can find a funny one. I'm convinced that half these jurors didn't pay full attention. How could one watch Jen McCabe and the rest of them and think something else shady is going on? You're just watching this through these insanely biased eyes of where you're assuming like the weird things like Jen, like the picture that Karen leaked through Sean last January that showed them carrying John away, and she's at that moment talking to the cop. As though that consciousness of guilt, they said. This is crazy. You people shouldn't be on a jury. You're not qualified. People that think like that. It sounds like these jurors, fortunately, even the ones that voted not guilty, were logical and diligent in doing their job. Fortunately, they're not like Turtle Boy or Sean. Fortunately. All right, so let's pull this out. Okay. Oh, Norwegian Troll is back. Man, I was worried about you, Marius. I was actually just thinking about you today, and I was going to give you a message because I used to hear from you regularly, and been like a couple months since I haven't heard you. At last, I got some live show. TB is invested in this to see the problem with his statement from the jurors. Yeah, he's too invested in this. Exactly. He's got too much to lose now at this point to tell you the truth. And I think everybody kind of knows that. But thank you very much, Norwegian. I appreciate it. And Govinda. Is that your name, actually? Govinda? Sounds kind of cool, actually. Like Butros Gali. That's probably just your YouTube name. But thank you for the donation. I very much appreciate it. Let's go to the comments. What's the score of the NFL game, guys? If anybody can give me that, now I can actually read the comments. We'll open up with a Jules comment. Jules, the one and only now. Used to be Jules has arrived. What Free Karen Reed doesn't realize is the conspiracy isn't evidence. None of the BS is evidence. Nothing in the conspiracy actually proves anything. Butt dials don't prove murder. Google searches don't prove it. I mean, I would agree with the Turtle Crowd that if she made that search at 2:27, yeah, that something happened in the house. But she didn't. And the evidence is that she didn't. 31-10, Miami is up. All right. Thank you, Thomas. Well, I guess maybe Miami really is going to be for real this year. Baccarat player says John's eyes were swollen shut. Yep. And that was explained by the medical examiner. My friend Pat is here too. Hey, Patrice. Oh, Buffalo is up. Oh, okay. All right. Oh, well, as a Pats fan, I guess it doesn't matter because even though the Pats are in first place, I don't know. Hi, Christina. The Pats are in first place, so I think there's a good chance the Pats win this week. Very good chance against Seattle. Seattle won pretty good against a Denver team that looks to be in disarray. So I think there's a pretty good chance the Pats start out 2-0, which would be mind-boggling, but it's also not going to last. Just looking for comments somewhere else. All right. So, and I have to say too, I apologize. I was not able to get the document for the appeal. And I saw earlier somebody said here, I think what Maui Swift, that the appeal was already ruled against by the SJC. I don't know. But I did not get to read the appeal. And it sounds like there's some interesting things in it. So I reached out and wasn't able to get the document. So as soon as I will, I won't necessarily do a show right away. Like if I get it tomorrow, I don't want to do a show tomorrow. So if anybody has any interesting stuff on the appeal, I did read some articles in the paper on it, but I want to actually read the document itself. Jimmy McNutty. Yes, he said New England killed every survivor pool. I picked the Patriots. I'm sorry, I picked Cincinnati in my survivor pool. So the Patriots knocked me out in week 1. But the last several years, it hasn't gone well in my survivor pool. I've been knocked out within the first few weeks anyway. So I was rooting for the Patriots to win. I've watched the Patriots fans since like 1974. Barely missed a game when I was a little kid, 8 years old. All those bad years in the 80s and early 90s, I watched them. And so I always root for them to win. And that was more important to me than the survivor pool. I actually, so we talk about the butt dials. I was involved in something this week that was not only a butt dial, but it was similar to the two Brians, that it was a double butt dial. And because what had happened was, somebody had called me early in the morning, like 7:00, and I was asleep. And then I picked up my phone. I think the person had called me, and then texted me right after that. And I picked up the phone and I meant to read the text and I accidentally hit that person's number, but I didn't really want to talk because it was like 6:45. So I stopped it and then I just went to their text. And so there was 2 quick calls, that person calling me and then me calling them. And they were in the sense of my call to that person was an accident. It was a butt dial because people call it a butt dial now, but they're not butt dials anymore. They used to be butt dials when you had flip phones. It's different now. But people that have been around through the early parts of the cell phone age call it butt dials. That's what people our age call it that. But it's a synonym. It's a word for everything. Just kind of like people will call any kind of broken taillight a crack taillight. It's just kind of generic term for describing a broken taillight. It's not meant to be descriptive. So had an interesting discussion today with a friend of mine that's a lawyer, and he said, the fear is that there'll be a couple of jurors that get on the second trial, that are just free Karen Reed people that have been absolutely influenced by this. That's obviously the fear, but I'm a little more optimistic than him because I believe that and this has been reinforced by what we're seeing here, that if the state just does a better job putting this stuff together, it's all over. And we're not seeing any evidence of corruption, even on the not guilty votes on the jury. We're seeing people that seem to have been earnestly trying to do their job, and they just weren't convinced. So, meanwhile, the majority of them were convinced. So if you want to win over these here, you really just have to put together, 2 will get another concussion. Wow. That's probably it for him. He'll probably retire. Jules says, Aidan can't admit he was wrong because it'll destroy his own case. Oh, let me just finish my statement on that. So I'm more optimistic that if the state just does a good job, that I think there's a reasonable chance. I think most jurors do take it very seriously. And so I think there's a reasonable chance that the state will be able to eliminate people that come into the jury with their minds made up ahead of time, one way or the other. And they'll just get good people with good jobs, as they did mostly on this jury, and get them to just take their oath and their work very seriously. And if that's the case, since the evidence is so powerfully against Karen, and you just have to present it in a better way, that should no, I disagree with this, Jules. She says, and first she says wrong. Well, it's an opinion thing, Jules. But she says wrong. Even the Google search wouldn't prove he was killed in the house. That's too weird of a coincidence for me. There are coincidences that happen. In the Delphi murders, there's a guy that has recently been sentenced to like 40 years in jail. His name is Keegan Kline. And he had been catfishing Libby. And had even possibly discussed meeting her at the bridge at one point. But he ultimately was not connected to the case. Richard Allen did it on his own. And that means that it's just an enormous coincidence that Keegan Kline was catfishing one of the girls. So coincidences do happen. But you can assign a kind of probability to it. Just, you don't have to put a specific number, but a rough idea in your head. And the idea that Jen is going to search for how long it would take for a man to die in the cold while her friend was supposedly just doing that, that's too much of a coincidence for me. Would that prove murder by itself? No, but it would prove enough for me that I would believe that something went on, and you better get inside that house and start digging it up and going through all the evidence. But fortunately, it didn't happen anyways. So it just doesn't matter. But then Jules said Aidan can't admit he was wrong because it'll destroy his own case. Hey, I know he believes that, but it shouldn't really have a connection. But what he doesn't realize is if he did openly admit, this is interesting. So Jules is of the belief that if Turtle Boy admitted he was wrong and Karen is guilty, then the state might drop their charges. I have no reason to believe that. The charges have no connection. In fact, it would look pretty shady if the state did that. It would look really shady if Turtle Boy came out tomorrow and said that Karen Reed is guilty, and then next week the state dropped its witness intimidation charges. That would look like the state legitimately only charged Turtle to try to intimidate him. It would look really bad. So no, I don't think the state will do that. These are charges based on legitimate evidence that showed witness intimidation. And it's not like it's not going to happen again in other cases. So it's very important to follow through with this, not only to protect those witnesses who are currently under that onslaught, but to protect future witnesses that might have happen under future Turtle Boys. What if Jen Altman gets her own blog, her own channel? Going to do the same thing. A lot of these people will. All right. So looking at the numbers, listen, I love these numbers. Over 200 people will sometimes pop in here from the Free Karen Lead land and laugh and say, you only got 200 people watching. And there's more than that because they also watch it on Facebook and YouTube. But the YouTube number is 209 right now. And people say, you suck. Look at that. But you don't understand. Like, those numbers are fine for me. I never dreamed of being a podcaster. I'm not looking to have thousands of people. I like having a nice, intelligent community in chat. And the chat's not moving so fast that I can't read it. And so I'm very comfortable with 200. Very comfortable with that. If you had asked me a year ago, what would be the ideal number for me to have? I would probably say 200. So did Turtle Boy ask the juror about the butt dials? Yeah. And basically what the juror said was most of that stuff really wasn't something that they either didn't discuss it at all, or they discussed it like for a few seconds and they called it fluff or a distraction and stuff like that. They didn't even really take the ARCA guys seriously. Doesn't sound like they took Rich Green or any of that data seriously at all. So they just didn't care about that stuff. They knew that it was an attempt to create reasonable doubt and that it was just gamesmanship. They didn't use that word, but they called it fluff. But it's an attempt to kind of create the impression of reasonable doubt. J15, that's a new name. Can people see the bigger plan here of Karen Reed's side? Well, I can't see it. Jimmy, come on. I've already answered some of your questions. I mean, I have a 1 in 2,000. I mean, yeah. Oh, I think you're saying, yeah, you have a pretty good chance of being seen here. When I'm reviewing something, I can't see the questions, but once I got it open now, when I'm not reading a document. Thank you, Quentin. Appreciate it. So Jimmy asked, do I believe the TB juror that it was 12-0 not guilty for murder? Yes, I do. I believe the last juror that said it. Several jurors have contacted the defense. I do believe it. And I believe that was the case before the jurors came out. I don't believe that they proved second-degree murder. Yes, by the third prong of it, the reckless endangerment, yes. but I don't think a jury was likely to send her to jail for 20 years or whatever based on that. They were going to want to have something that was really a decision of intent that related to John's death. Now, I do think it's possible. The best way to do that for me is that at 4:45, 5 o'clock, she knew that something had gone wrong with John. She thought he was dead, thought he was or seriously hurt, and she didn't call 911. So to me, that's a decision, a selfish decision that was made. Now, John was still alive at that time. Better chance that he could have lived. He was described by Flamati, the chief fireman there, that he told Trooper Proctor after they took away John to the hospital, he gave John a 10% chance of survival. So that was at 6:10, 6:15 when they took him away. What would have been the chance if John had been rescued an hour earlier? It would have been better. And she didn't call 911. It wouldn't, Google search alone wouldn't prove a conspiracy, but it would definitely say that probably something happened in the house, and you'd have to start investigating that for sure. And it would definitely create reasonable doubt. If that 227 search was a matter of fact, there's no way you'd get a conviction on this for Karen. And I'd be out there protesting with him. I'd have a pink shirt. Oh, the members only podcast. Well, I can do that. I just don't know if there's enough members that would show, but we can do that. But it's almost like that here anyways. We can do but join us, Jimmy, at Discord. So all the members are eligible. Just email me at leetskev@gmail.com. I'll put it down here. And what we'll do is when we get a few people, a few regulars in there, maybe we'll do a show, like an interactive show on Discord so that other people can talk. The Gamer Burger says, I have jealousy issues. Who am I jealous of? There are probably people I'm jealous of in life, but it's not anybody you know. It's definitely not Turtle Boy. I wouldn't trade shoes with that guy for 1 second. I wake up every day and I can look in the mirror and feel good about how I've covered this case. He can't. Yeah, I don't remember what he said. So, Mark, I don't remember what he said that for, actually. It does sound familiar, but I can't remember it. Let me put Mark's comment up. Oh, it moved. Mark said the funniest thing was last Friday on the 2020 show was AJ saying the razor's edge for this theory. Yeah, I forget the context of that. Marianne says this is from a former DA. Approximately 90 to 95% of cases end in a plea deal. In my previous work as a DA, I can tell you that our conviction rate at the trial hovered at the 87 to 89% range when the case actually went to trial. There is also no firm statistic for retrials. Again, a conviction is a conviction. So, yeah, so that's the question again would be, people have asked us, do I think it's an advantage for the defense or the prosecution in terms of the next trial? And I've always said the prosecution, and the reason is because the evidence is so compelling against Karen Read, and it just wasn't presented in a compelling way. So all you got to do is do that, and the margin of error is going to improve dramatically for the prosecution. Mini fun. What do I make of the interviewed juror? I mean, I thought the juror sounded like someone that was diligently doing their duty. I had no problem with the things that that juror said, nor am I surprised by them. And if people that have been following my channel know that I'm not surprised by them. Those are the things that I've been talking about for a year as being important. I've been saying for a year that the most important thing is for the state to have a convincing accident reconstruction theory. And if they don't, pretty good chance Karen will get off. And they didn't. They also didn't have any actual evidence that proved that Karen knew that she did it at the time that she did it. We were told the voicemails were going to be very destructive in that regard. They weren't. The voicemails didn't show any evidence of that. There was no evidence in those voicemails, 5 of them that came. First one was at 12:37. The last one's at 1:18. There's no evidence that she knew she hit anything. Now, I believe that she probably knew she hit something only based on the fact that she later deleted the video, the ring video of her coming home. And the only thing that I can think of that would have been in that video is her getting out in the driveway and looking at her taillight. Thank you, Jimmy. I will get to that after. Appreciate it. How do you present with the case with I don't find with tarnished witnesses? I didn't find the witnesses to be tarnished. I think people are really overreading into that. They're basically, I don't think people that, other than people that were already on the Free Karen Read side, I don't think other people looked at these witnesses as tarnished. And I've talked to a lot of people. We had some people, friends and family, that were not on either side in the case, but took the trial seriously. And they're intelligent people. And I was just able to say, can you watch this as a juror would? And they did try. And they did not believe that the jurors were tarnished in any way. They thought the witnesses. They thought the witnesses were quite good. So one of the people that I had do that doesn't at all believe there's a conspiracy, but did have enough questions and was just a little bit worried about just the idea of sending the Karen to jail for a long time. So she wasn't comfortable with voting, wouldn't have been comfortable voting guilty. But the other people I talked to all ended up feeling pretty confident that she was guilty of at least the manslaughter. It's 6:08. Well, there was another message at 5:08 or no, maybe 5:24 or something like that. There was another message there. I apologize. I was talking about the string of 5 that came, and then she stopped for a few hours while she seemed to take a nap. She says she's took a nap, and all indications that I know of that the phone information backs that up. There's certainly nothing was presented at trial that said she didn't take a nap. But then she wakes up, and from the car, she calls John again and says, "John, where the fuck are you?" Or another version of that it sounds like she says, "John, is that you?" It's not clear. And I've heard different versions of that audio, which strangely sound different. But we don't know what she said or what she meant. But that was what I was talking about was the messages that she meant in the immediate aftermath. And there was a string of 5, and I think 2 texts. And none of them suggest she knew that she hit John. So J. Ray has a hard time believing that she deleted any video. So let's make that the last part of the discussion. Let me stretch for a second. All right. It's a fair question, right? How did this video go missing? Was it a glitch? Was it not recorded by the ring? I believe it wasn't really clear at the trial, but I believe there's a footprint of the video. So those videos were there and somebody deleted it. So we know of 2 that are missing. One is Karen getting home, and the other is of Karen, Kerry, and Jen leaving in Kerry Roberts' car to go out looking for John. Those are the only 2 that are missing. Who would have the ability to delete that video, and who would have the incentive to delete that video? So let's say you might believe, or you might entertain the prospect of the troopers deleting that video if they knew how. And they had access to John's phone, so let's say they could have done it. Why would they delete video of Karen coming home? I can't think of any reason. Why would they delete video of Karen, Jen, and Kerry leaving? I can't think of any reason. Now, maybe there's a reason we haven't thought of, right? But on the other hand, when we look at Karen, she did have a reason. We know that Kerry and Jen testified that Karen showed them her taillight in the driveway. And in the video that shows when they first got there, they didn't stop. It wasn't then. So it had to have happened when they were leaving. And that's why Karen deleted it, because she didn't want them seeing her showing the women, Kerry and Jen, her broken taillight. And presumably, that's what happened when she got home. Her phone connected to John's Wi-Fi somewhere between 12:36 and 12:37. And at 12:37, she made her first voicemail to John. She said, "I fucking hate you." The next one came at 12:42. And in that, there's no actual, she doesn't say anything, but you can hear her pulling into the garage. You can hear the garage door closing, and then you can hear the beep, beep, beep as she's getting close to the wall or whatever object's in there. And then you can hear her boots on the ground, on the cement in the garage. That's at 12:42. So at 12:37, between 12:36 and 12:37, when she pulled into the driveway, and she must have parked there. She must have parked there for 5 minutes, because then she went out at 12:42. She probably didn't have a garage opener. And in that period, she must have looked at her taillight, and that's why she deleted it. So I don't know if that satisfies you, Jay. I mean, just a couple of other pieces of evidence on that. So when they first leaked that video from the driveway from 508, when Karen first leaked it to Court TV last summer, you can look this up, because if you look up driveway video on that, it's going to be on the top 5 all the time. So you can find it. And in it, the Court TV reporter says the defense team said, when it pulls away, you can see it clearly missing pieces. That's what she said. And in addition, Karen herself described to reporter Gretchen Voss that when she showed the girls the taillight in the driveway, when she looked at the taillight in the driveway, she actually pulled a piece out and dropped it in the driveway. So Karen herself has described it as missing pieces in other places. So look, there's no nice way to say it. Karen lies a lot. You could do a whole show on that. There'll probably be a chapter in the book on it. I mean, I'm talking about things that she has indisputably lied about. I'm not being biased when I say that. I'm telling you, she's been caught in both the various accounts she gives to the media, different statements. She lies. There's no way they can put this woman on the stand. She's got too many different stories about what happened. And yeah, Heather, thank you. I mean, it's just true. It's just true. It's what she does. I wouldn't say it's a compulsive liar. I think she's trying to, she knows she's guilty, and she's trying to come up with a fake story here. And it's not easy to do. Sooner or later, you slip up. So I don't know. I don't have any reason to know that she's a compulsive liar. She's guilty. She's just guilty. That simple. All right, guys. Let me go see if I can catch the end of the football game, and working hard on the book, and more news on that soon. But thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate you, and we'll see you all again soon.